Hello everyone, this is Thersites the Historian, getting a slightly late start. Today is Sean's birthday, March 14th. Tomorrow, of course, is the Ides of March, the date of one of the most famous assassinations in modern history. Actually, wait, I fucked that up. That would not be modern history, that would definitely be ancient history. Anyway, that's one of the assassinations we will be covering, the famous assassination of Julius Caesar on March 15th of 44 BCE, but we're also planning to cover 4 other assassinations. We'll begin by looking at the assassination of Philip II of Macedon. First, some quick housekeeping. Welcome one and all to the stream. If you have anything you'd like to say, you can leave it here in the form of a super chat. If we raise $25 or more, there will be a book giveaway. And that's about it in terms of announcements. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about Philip II of Macedon. Philip came to power when he was about 24 years old, and this would have been in 359 BCE. Philip was the third son, and therefore he was not actually in the running to be king. The only reason he became king is because his 2 older brothers predeceased him, and his, I believe it was second brother, was Perdiccas III. He died, leaving behind a 5 or 6-year-old son, Amyntas. Actually, he might have been a little younger than that, if anything. And the thing about Macedon is that they needed an adult king. Macedon, when Philip took over, had a relatively weak army, and they were surrounded on 3 or 4 sides by enemies. They had the Illyrians, they had the Athenians messing with them from the sea, they had Thessaly, which wasn't really too hostile in terms of aggression, but still it was a neighbor that had men under arms, and there were some increasingly aggressive rulers in some of the major Thessalian cities, including Jason of Pherae. To the north were the Thracians, who also liked to raid them, and there was another people called the Paeonians. So Macedon was constantly beset by enemies. Philip had grown up mostly, at court at Pella, but also he had spent a significant amount of time living in Thebes when Epaminondas and Pelopidas were the great generals of Greece. So in his teenage years, he lived with them as a hostage and got to learn about the art of warfare. These generals were fairly revolutionary. Epaminondas famously decided to mix up typical hoplite tactics by loading one of his flanks. This led to a great victory over the Spartans at the Battle of Leuctra, one of the most important battles in Greek polis history at least. So Philip was very aware of how to build a modern army and also of how to use different arms together, i.e. how to coordinate light infantry with heavy infantry with cavalry. His major innovation was the Pike Phalanx. He quickly instituted these reforms when he became regent, and after winning a few victories in the first year or so of his regency, the Macedonian army decided to declare him king. They needed an actual king who was already a man who could get stuff done, rather than a boy, and over the next few years, Philip would really solidify his position. This included marrying Olympias and fathering Alexander the Great. Olympias was the princess of Epirus, so this was a major pickup diplomatically. Although Macedon was far more powerful than Epirus, it was still a useful and nearby ally. Philip also married many other women to make alliances, including the daughters of Macedonian nobles, and in general, it can be said that Philip played the game of politics exceptionally well. So the combination of creating stability on the borders and a strong army meant that Philip and Macedon rose to power fairly swiftly. By the 340s or so, most people in Athens recognized the greatest geopolitical threat to Greece as a whole as being Philip and Macedon. Traditionally, Athens had dealt with difficult Macedonian rulers by backing other members of the Argead family and hoping that they would overthrow a more popular, powerful ruler, because Athens wanted a weak Macedonian ruler who would sell them timber. The Athenian fleet required constant shipments of timber to keep itself operating, and so for the Athenians, that was their major object. Philip, of course, consistently outmaneuvered the Athenians and defeated a lot of their plots against him. Sometimes he did it just by having a much better army and better generals. Other times he did it by diplomacy and by his cunning. And we mostly know about Philip from Athenian sources. A lot of what we know comes from the orator Demosthenes, who really defined his career by being anti-Philip. We also have an account from Diodorus Siculus, which is the only really complete account, or mostly complete account, of Philip's reign. Diodorus, by the way, is the same individual who brings us much of what we know about the successor period. Although he doesn't have all that much to say about Alexander, interestingly enough, because a lot of Book 17, which would cover Alexander, is missing. By the time that Philip was assassinated in 336, he was about 47 years old. His son Alexander, his heir apparent, was 20 to 21. Philip had recently defeated the Greek coalition at Chaeronea, and he was on the cusp of invading Asia at the head of an anti-Persian coalition. He was at the height of his powers, but physically he was not in great shape. He had lost an eye in battle earlier, one of his legs had been smashed severely by a club, and he had a lot of trouble walking. So it would be a mistake to think that he had, say, 30 years left in the tank or something like that, but certainly he was not necessarily on death's doorstep. He had been extremely successful, he was deeply beloved, and he had established a level of legitimacy that most Argead kings of Macedon did not have. The achievement that he had was recognized as fulfilling the potential of Macedon, which had been there for probably 100 years, but had not been realized because a lot of the kings had died early, been assassinated, or fallen in battle. And really, I think it's accurate when scholars say that Macedon was an autocracy moderated by assassination. It was actually the tradition in Macedon for kings to get assassinated. And this could be by relatives, or it could also be by pissed off, indignant noblemen. And in the case of Philip, it was the latter. He didn't really have too many rivals for the throne. His deposed nephew Amyntas was fairly friendly, and Philip had won him over as a friend, and had also married him to one of his daughters, the half-Illyrian Cunani. So actually, when you read about Eurydice II, also known as Adia, in the successor period, that is actually the daughter of Philip's daughter and Philip's nephew. And if you study any kind of monarchy, but especially the Macedonian monarchy and its various allies and neighbors, you will see that there's a lot of uncle-on-niece marriage. Anyhow, Philip was recently married to a woman named Cleopatra, not to be confused with his daughter, who was also named Cleopatra, and she was the daughter of Attalus, who was a major Macedonian nobleman. Philip and Attalus were close allies for this reason, and Philip had promoted Attalus to be the co-commander of the advance force for the campaign into Asia. It would be co-commanded by Attalus and Parmenion. Parmenion, of course, is generally regarded as Philip's top general. Philip once said famously, "I only know of one competent general, and his name is Parmenion." So, there was a famous incident in 337 when Philip got married to Cleopatra, where a very drunk Attalus addressed all of his very drunk fellow noblemen and royals, and he said that the marriage between his niece and Philip, I think I might have said daughter earlier, she's definitely his niece though, that his niece and Philip would have a legitimate Macedonian heir. And maybe he misspoke, or maybe he was trying to insult Alexander, but Alexander, whose mother was an Epirote, got extremely pissed off by this. So Alexander rose to challenge Attalus to a fight, and Philip rose and tried to defend Attalus. Apparently he drew his sword against his own son, but then stumbled and fell. He was very drunk too, and also had a bad leg. Alexander then mocked him as being incapable of leading the Greeks into Asia if he couldn't get from one couch to the next, went into exile with his mother, but then they were reconciled. The reason I'm going into this detail is because when Philip was assassinated, two of the favorite suspects of many people in the ancient world and today were Olympias and her son Alexander. So, Philip eventually brought Alexander back along with Olympias. And by the time he died in 336, it was very apparent that Philip regarded Alexander as his clear heir. If anything, this had been clear since maybe 342 or so. You normally wanted to wait and see how a boy developed, and clearly Alexander was his best option. Alexander was not actually the oldest son, though. Aridaeus, who probably had some sort of developmental disability, was actually the oldest son. But Aridaeus, of course, had some disabilities and would not have been able to serve as king. So, Alexander didn't really have a very strong motive, is what I'm getting at. The kingdom was already effectively his. Even if Philip and Cleopatra had a kid, that kid would not come of age for about 20 years. And Alexander, in the meantime, could win all kinds of honors as a general and be an obvious choice. So there would be very little threat of him losing the throne to a younger sibling. And now that Philip was losing a lot of his mobility, he would need his son to do a lot more stuff, so Alexander would have opportunities. So what actually did end up happening when Philip was assassinated at the wedding? Who killed him and why? Well, in the intro to this, the intro post I've made, I promised that there would be butt stuff in this episode. So let's talk about some butt stuff. Apparently, according to the historian Diodorus Siculus, who most likely drew upon a lost historian named Justin, what happened was that Philip had a bodyguard who had been his former lover named Pausanias. This Pausanias was jealous because Philip now took a new man named Pausanias as lover. So, the first Pausanias accused the second of being a hermaphrodite. And this caused great shame for the second Pausanias, who then, to prove his loyalty and love to Philip, sacrificed himself needlessly in a battle. Philip, despite getting a little older and more crippled, would still put himself in the front line, so the second Pausanias ran in front of him and got killed by an Illyrian. Apparently, that second Pausanias was a friend or relative of Attalus, Philip's new son-in-law. Or wait, uncle-in-law, whatever it would be, I don't know. So Attalus invited the first Pausanias to his house for a drinking party. Pausanias got shit-faced. And then Attalus took him to a barn full of mule drivers or muleteers, and they gang raped him. Of course, Attalus denied it, and Philip was secretly pretty pissed off that Attalus had done this. But he regarded Attalus as being more important than Pausanias. Attalus was much better positioned, and probably had a lot of followers in his corner of Macedon, so Philip was determined to keep Attalus on his side, as he was about to depart for Asia. You don't want part of Macedon to be disloyal while you are away, and most likely while Alexander is with you. I said that because we actually don't know what Alexander's role would have been in Philip's invasion. It's not written down anywhere. Anyway, Philip decided to try to appease Pausanias by giving him gifts and promoting him. But Pausanias thought that his concerns had been ignored, and he felt that he had been wronged both by Attalus due to the gang rape, and by Philip, his friend, former lover, and king, for not giving him the justice that his honor demanded. So Attalus was determined to Pausanias was determined to avenge himself. And he did this by planning to murder Philip. So at the ceremony where Philip was celebrating his daughter's marriage to Olympias' younger brother, Alexander of Epirus, and by the way, this Cleopatra, Philip's daughter, was Alexander's sister, full sister. So this is another uncle-niece marriage. As I said, there's going to be a lot of that when we're talking about the Macedonians. Philip wasn't taking very close security precautions because he was trying to be gracious. He invited lots of people from all over Greece to be at the wedding, and he was wining and dining them. Philip was actually an extremely charismatic and charming guy, very jovial, very good at being witty and personable. Despite what Demosthenes might say, Philip was excellent at making friends. So he had his bodyguard at a distance, and of course one of his bodyguards was Pausanias, the would-be assassin. For Pausanias to sneak close to Philip and have weapons would not be unusual. After all, he's supposed to guard Philip. What better way than to have weapons? So he waited until Philip was a little bit isolated and got close to him and cut him down with a dagger and then took off running. Two of the other bodyguards took off after him. One of them was Perdiccas, who I believe is the same Perdiccas who later became Alexander's regent for the young Alexander IV. And Pausanias would have escaped, but on the way to his horses that he had waiting for him, he tripped over a tree root. So the other two bodyguards caught him and killed him. And after that, things moved quickly. Antipater stepped in and helped Alexander secure the throne. One of Alexander's early moves was to eliminate his cousin Amyntas. And after this, Alexander would eliminate a couple more people who were friends of Pausanias, but for the most part, this was not a terribly bloody transition of power. And if anything, despite it coming after an assassination, this was a very peaceful and smooth transition. The main problem was not internal, it was external. Alexander, despite having done really well at the Battle of Chaeronea as a unit commander, was still seen as a green, unproven general. People knew Philip was really good, but they didn't know about Alexander. So there were revolts both in Greece and in the north. Alexander, of course, dealt with those, but this delayed the invasion of Asia by almost 2 years. So the main immediate consequence of Philip's murder was that the invasion of Persia was delayed by an entire 2 years. Had it gone down earlier, Persia would have been in worse shape because Darius III had just come to power and was really trying to get himself set up. Now the question becomes, did Pausanias act alone? I think he did. Everything about the assassination, from it being a killing about honor, to that being a way for aristocrats to express their disapproval, is completely in line with everything that we know about both the Macedonian kingdom and the broader ancient Greek world. The famous assassination of Hipparchus in Athens also took place due to a lover's quarrel gone wrong, where Hipparchus, the brother of the ruler Hippias, had taken too many liberties with, I believe it was Harmodius, who had then gone to his other lover, Aristogeiton, and the two of them had planned revenge and murdered Hipparchus at a festival. Hippias took this as a revolution, but it was really a personal quarrel. And later on, several years down the line, after both of the assassins had been killed, these two aristocratic boys who were into, aristocratic lover culture got turned into the founders of democracy. Post facto, of course. They had no idea they were fighting for democracy. But, according to Cleisthenes and his successors, that's what they had done. So, there are some theories about Philip's murder. Here's a nice image of it. Here's a better image, but unfortunately this is an article by Adrian Goldsworthy. I reject the basic notion that Alexander had anything to gain by this. I just don't think it's plausible. Why would you kill someone who planned to give you the throne? Especially someone who is deeply popular. And I also think it works against the theory that Alexander was involved, that Antipater sided with him so quickly, since Antipater and Philip were contemporaries and had been very good friends for their entire lives. Antipater had nothing to gain by doing that either. If anything, he would have lost influence under Alexander as compared to Philip, because it's natural for kings to want to take their age mates and people they had grown up with and make them their main circle. So that would make no sense. As for Olympius, who is often cited as a subject, there's a recent book by Elizabeth Carney where she dedicates an entire chapter to the issue of Olympius's culpability. And what she points out is that, one, Olympias probably had way less influence in Macedon than we realize, and that most of her influence came both when Alexander came to power and after his death. Philip II was a very strong personality and did not really allow any of his wives to do all that much. We know Alexander and Philip butted heads. That does not necessarily mean that Olympias was deeply involved. And actually, there was a previous scholar, William Tarn, from the 1940s, who argued that, if anything, our portrayal of Olympias as this super scheming, very involved woman was basically propaganda put forward by Cassander after he had murdered Olympias and the young Alexander IV. And another thing Carney observes in her book, what's her book called? Let me find the title real fast. It's a very good book, absolutely worth reading for any of you who are interested in the Macedonian monarchy. Her book is called King and Court in Ancient Macedonia, Rivalry, Treason, and Conspiracy. Her other argument is that if you look at all the tropes about women, especially the negative tropes in the ancient world, Olympias kind of fits all of them. So a lot of what is attributed to her might be kind of made up or meant to play into stereotypes that men would find repugnant. And if you fit that in with Tarn's idea about Cassander spreading propaganda about Olympias, it all adds up to it not being all that likely that Olympias was behind the assassination. So I think that this is a case where the lone daggerman was to blame. As for the possible culpability of Amyntas, I mentioned earlier that Alexander had him taken out. This was mostly because Amyntas was a potential threat. He was still fairly young at 30, but had technically been king and had full legitimacy. He was a full-fledged member of the Argead family. His father was Philip's older brother, a former king, and he shared the same grandfather as Alexander. So the reason Alexander killed him is not necessarily because he was guilty of anything, just because he could have been a problem. And even if he was well-disposed towards Philip and Alexander, if Alexander was going to be away for a long period of time in Asia, then Amyntas might change his mind at some point. And we already know from history that the Athenians and other opponents of Macedon were more than willing to spread gold around to get Argead relatives to revolt. So, that is pretty much all I have on Philip II for now and his assassination. Are there any follow-up questions that any of you have on this? Let's see. Let's find the earliest super chats. And another thing I need to do, I got a text from Sean. Let's see what's going on with him real fast.
I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I just came in.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, well, it's my birthday, and we had a hard time closing out at the bar. That's all.
Oh, yeah. Well, happy birthday, by the way.
Yeah. Also, I think like the thank you, man. Also, I think with the whole daylight savings time thing, it's like it fucks you up for a day, man. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my computers hasn't caught on that it's DST yet. This one is fine, but the other one thinks it's still 10:37.
Yeah, actually, now you say it, like my phone's fine, but my computer hasn't caught up either, so I gotta fix that one up, But yeah, fuck, I was talking to one of the bartenders, and she woke up at like 2:30 p.m. today. So I was like, holy fuck, man! It really does, though, man. It messes people up, So no, it's been a good birthday time. I see you've done Philip II there.
Yep.
You were commenting, of course, that Olympia was not involved, that it was Cassander propaganda.
Yeah, I'm not convinced at all that Olympias had anything to do with it. She just didn't have the pull in Macedon. She was actually very unpopular there, from what I can tell. And her prominence really began when Alexander actually took the throne. And in many ways, I think she was there to serve as a check on Antipater. And then she couldn't even do that effectively. She and Antipater butted heads, so she went back to Epirus for most of Alexander's Asian campaign.
Okay.
And then she came out of Epirus to try to defend her grandson, Alexander IV. But yeah, she wasn't actually that powerful. At least not compared with the image of her.
Yeah, no, there is this image of her as a powerful conniver is the image that I've always seen bandied about. Probably doesn't help that you have a bad movie where Angelina Jolie plays her, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was based on the old stereotype of what Olympias was like. But it's also funny because it's something I was thinking of earlier. I forgot to say when I was covering Philip. But one thing I find odd about the normal coverage of that royal family is that the assumption is that Alexander was caught between these two monumental egos. But people forget that Alexander was demonstrating a very well developed ego of his own from a very early age.
Yeah.
So he was not getting bullied by anyone. That was not happening. And when he was talking with his father, Philip left him in charge of Macedon as a temporary regent while he went on a deep campaign. Alexander resolved on his own to raise troops, put down a revolt, and found a new city named after himself. He did not. He was not his mother's puppet. Okay, like this notion that he wouldn't have done any of this if his mom hadn't been whispering in his ear. Bullshit. He had a lot of Philip in him, and he also had Olympias in him. Clearly, I don't think that he required Olympias whispering in his ear to act dramatically. If we also look at his Asian campaign, his mom was nowhere near, and he still has the same personality. So what does that tell you? Anyway.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm going to get some water here.
Okay.
And what would you prefer right now, a Duke of Buckingham or Garfield?
Let's do the Duke of Buckingham.
Okay, all right, we'll do Bucky. All right, give me a sec. I'm gonna
All right.
get some. I'm gonna get my water.
I'm going to start looking at some super chats real fast while you're doing that. All right. Our first super chat of the evening comes to us from Will Mantho for $4.99. Thank you, sir. Just wanted to say thank you for all of your hard work, especially the Byzantine Emperor series, by far the best YouTube history series I've watched. Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate it. It's one of those that kind of started a bit as an accident, but I'm glad I did start it, and I'm looking forward to getting back on it. Actually, the next super chat asked that question. Diogenes donated in 1776. I guess to celebrate American independence a few months early. Thank you, Diogenes. Hola. When do you plan on starting back up the Byzantine series? Also, ever considered rating the most famous generals of all time? Y'all seem knowledgeable enough to do so. Well, I'm not sure exactly when I'll get back to Byzantium. It should be very soon, though. I've been trying to finish up a chapter for the last couple of weeks, and because the Byzantine series tends to take a decent amount of reading, I probably won't get back into that for another week or so. It's probably going to take another full week to finish the chapter I'm working on, unfortunately. But after that, I think I will probably try to do Basil Part 4 and Part 5 and get through those as quickly as I can. I wanted to have those done by now, but it just didn't really pan out that way. And I guess that's just life when you're working on a dissertation. I mean, time is very limited, and writing for a dissertation, it's extremely labor intensive. I mean, sometimes I'll spend all day writing, and I'm lucky to get 5 or 6 pages because I have to cite everything. I have to look up a lot of notes, and every time I go to make a point, I sometimes realize I don't have enough information, and I have to go find other stuff. And anyway, it's a process, and it's not necessarily a fun process.
Man, writing's miserable.
I like writing. I just don't like dissertation writing specifically.
Oh no, I mean, like it's when I say miserable, I mean, of course I like it, and if you're in the groove, it's very good, and if people like what you've written, it's excellent, of course. But I think about what the actor Robert Shaw said, because he wrote books and plays, but he also was acting, and he said acting was more fun. You got an immediate response back.
Yeah, it's true.
Books, you work on that shit for months, years, and you don't even know what people are going to think. At least if you're acting or playing music, you know immediately what they think. I mean, in that immediacy kind of sucks if it's not going right, which I can understand. I do tours. So it's, I guess, in that way, a similar sort of thing, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
and I guess as you advance as a scholar and you have that reputation, you can get away with more over
yeah,
time. Um, so, like the senior scholars, the people who are either retired or semi-retired, the people who had the big names, they're rarely asked to cite a lot of their stuff, or at least they're not asked to be as fastidious about citing things. But on dissertation, you have to dot all your I's, cross all your T's, and
yes,
it's really just your proof of professionalism. So you are on a more stringent standard than almost anyone else, but because it's your first real go round, what you produce will not only be the most labor intensive thing you've ever done in your life, but will also suck. Which is really painful to spend that much time on something that I know I will look back on and hope that no one ever looks up. Even though I stand by the points that I make in it, and I think I'm usually a pretty good writer, but there are parts of this that I'm sure are absolutely turgid, horrific shit in terms of the writing.
yeah. But just look at the bright side. It's rare for anybody to go like, I didn't really need to look up this obscure dissertation, right?
True, that's true. I hope. But yeah,
But I'm
so I mean,
not.
like, because a lot of it, you also uh, are supposed to demonstrate mastery of the scholarship. So if people write about shit you think is stupid, and that's the dominant strain of historiography, guess what? Have fun talking about some stupid shit. That's why I have 10 pages in my dissertation on, and I shit you not, a real debate, how to hold a hoplite spear. What hand grip people use. An issue I honestly, I don't give a fuck about. And I don't understand how anyone gives a fuck about. But there are people who've written books on those kind of details.
You know, I mean, yeah, you'll run into some of that with musket combat, but I feel like, for instance, the smoothbore versus rifle debate in the Civil War is much more consequential than hand grip.
Yeah, I would say that's a much more substantive debate. Although, I mean, yeah, it is one that gets a little bit too into the weeds. And also my problem with it is fundamentally it comes off as condescending towards the historical subjects that we're looking at. I'm going to give someone credit. If someone is a farmer who works with their hands all day, you hand them a sharp instrument, and they probably used it in the past at some point. I'm sure they can figure out how to kill someone with it. It's probably not that
That
hard for
was
them.
that would seem to be the most likely thing. Yes.
So, I don't know. Overhand grip, underarm grip. Either way, we know a couple things from studying it. One is that most hits would not penetrate armor. And two is that a lot of these guys were way better than others because of physical strength, training, whatever. But also we know that it's a matter of physics. If you use enough force, you can achieve penetration. So this is not hard, yet there are
Sounds
books written about it. I don't understand why it's not just a given, but maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't know.
I just gotta say, man, the last minute, everything you've said sounds like either masturbation or sex. I'm just saying, okay?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, combat is about penetration. So I guess
I
maybe
mean,
those people who say that
overhand
all
grip,
sex is
underhand grip.
violent are right. You know.
All right, you ready for me to get into the Duke of
Oh,
Buckingham?
one last super chat
Oh,
from
okay.
Levant. He says, "Who killed Julian the Apostate? The Persians he was at war with, or the Christians of his own empire, who apparently claimed they assassinated him?" I would say it would be a combination of the Persians who attacked his camp and his decision not to put on a breastplate. The Christians of his own empire did not really betray him. Maybe if he had lived longer, they might have, but they never really got an opportunity to. He only ruled in independent capacity for about a year and a half, and he died because of a lucky shot or unlucky shot from a Persian spear.
So wait, why didn't he put a breastplate on?
He was in a hurry to get out of his tent and rally his men. So he just kind of rushed into battle, and had he been wearing a breastplate, he would have been fine. I don't know if he could have extracted his army any better than Jovian did, because Jovian ended up having to pay a bunch of money and cede some land, but I think he would have had a much better chance than Jovian just because he was the established leader of the army and, had some purchase with the troops. That being said, success was not guaranteed. He was in a tough spot, and he left his successor in a pretty bad spot. But anyway, I would say that what killed him was an unlucky die roll when he went into combat without full armor.
Yeah, man, he looking for a 6 and got a 1. I got you. Shit, sorry.
Arrian's account of Alexander is really good. Somebody asked.
Well, I know Arrian is... What's the other account? We have Arrian and who else?
Quintus Curtius Rufus.
Okay.
And also, that one's a little underrated. It gets a little more gossipy than Arrian. Arrian's better for campaign details, but Quintus Curtius Rufus also does seem to have drawn on a lot of original sources, despite the fact that he himself writes in Latin. So I would suggest reading that one too.
Actually, before we continue on, a question that I'm wondering now. What is a historical source in the ancient world that you particularly detest? Like you think is either like awfully written and or just this is unreliable crap?
The one source that I always go to as my least favorite would be the writings of Athanasius. Because I was forced to read a bunch of theological stuff when I was at Kentucky because a lot of the classes focused on it. And with a lot of, even though I'm not into theology really, I love philosophy, pretty indifferent to theology, but I can at least appreciate some of the intellect that goes into it. So, for instance, with Clement of Alexandria or Origen, clearly there's a great mind at work. There's a certain logic to it, there's a flow, there are references to things, and agree or disagree, at least it all makes sense. Gotcha. Athanasius, however, is a simpleton. This man, first of all, he's not very well read. He pretty much only knows the New Testament. Outside of the New Testament, I see no real evidence that he has read or understood much of anything. When he tries to talk about why a lot of the pagan philosophers are full of it, his descriptions of their philosophy are insanely wrong. For instance, he says that Epicureanism is wrong because if they were right about atoms, then we would all just be one body part. You couldn't, you can't be, say, a million atoms of Sean that make the whole, because otherwise each atom would have to be the same body part. You'd have to be just a giant ear or a giant hand. And he thinks he's making a great point. And he also says, and also atoms can't be real because we have different objects. We have water and rocks, so checkmate. And it's just the dumbest fucking argument I've ever heard. It makes no sense on any level. I mean, it's...
Checkmate, bitches.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, even PragerU, if he was making this video for PragerU, even they might edit it or refuse to release it because it wouldn't even meet that standard. I mean, just shit-level arguments. And Athanasius, by the way, owes all of his influence in the later tradition not to his theology, which again was total trash, but to the fact that he was really good at political maneuvering. He was very good at playing the victim. He was very good at smearing one of his chief opponents, Arius, the father of Arianism, and that's pretty much it. When it comes to actual theology, I can't imagine that he legitimately won a single debate in his entire life. Because the man was dumb. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Athanasius. I think he's actually a saint in some traditions, but they really need to revisit that issue because that was a bad decision.
The one for me, just to say real quick, is the Venerable Bede. I had to read his stuff. I absolutely detest him. It's all just like if the person he's writing about's a pagan, then they're cruel, they eat babies, they're a savage. If they're a Christian, they're saintly and amazing, and look what they did for mankind. There's a lot of holes in the information, too. It's not very well written. I mean, everything's got a bias, but the bias in Bede's work is real heavy. Like, I when I was reading Bede and somebody told me that was our main source of information for Dark Ages England, I concluded, I was like, okay, we know nothing then. Like, what we know stuff based on this heavily biased, limited source. He doesn't even go into a lot of detail with shit. He'll just be like, the Irish were defeated. Like, you're like, great.
Yeah.
How?
I mean, to be fair to Bede, he did live in a much less learned time than Athanasius.
No,
He also he was pretty much holed up in a monastery, just getting snippets of information. I mean, but yeah, the bias of if you're on this side, you're amazing. If you're on that side, you're Satan. That's
yeah.
that's often the case in religious histories.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, we say that, and of course it's Dark Ages England. But I think that you have other contemporaries like Procopius and Boethius, and both of them are much better writers, and they convey a lot more information to you. Now I know Boethius is more philosopher than historian, but I feel like you'll get more out of Boethius than you'll ever get out of reading Bede.
Yeah, I agree. I've actually never read much of Bede, and a lot of it is because I think I talked to you before I ever looked at it, and then I saw that what you're describing was completely accurate.
Yeah, I venerable. I would not use that fucking adjective to describe. All right,
I guess it's a
more
relative
like
term.
I would say the limited Bede, the narrow-minded Bede. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's the thing, though. A lot of surviving writers are not necessarily as broad-minded or intelligent as one might suspect. Um,
I do think. I mean, I'm a big fan of Plutarch. I do think Plutarch's very broad-minded. I would say.
I would say so, yeah. He's not the
Yeah.
best historian, but in terms of just as an overall thinker, he's pretty damn good.
Mm, well, I mean, it really is like a talent with biography, which is a genre that I love and hate because so many biographies are just terrible. Like so many. Like it's a genre where the bad stuff is like bargain basement bad, right? But the good stuff I think is peerless. If you can actually craft a good biography, then that's some fantastic stuff, you know.
And I think you're
Um,
right. It's one of those where it can potentially be amazing or absolute shit.
yeah, I've almost never read a mediocre biography. It's either one or the other, really. I mean, some are just good, I guess, but you know what I mean. It's rare to read where I'm like, oh, that was average. I'm either like I'm very impressed or this is awful and get away from me. But you want to get into Buckingham now?
Sure, let's talk about the Duke of Buckingham.
Yeah, George Villers. I don't know. I might be mispronouncing his name here. Uh, who will eventually become the Duke of Buckingham, which is what he's known as. But he was born to a minor noble family. Well, what's going to happen with him is that he's hanging out in the court of King James the First. Now, James the First to me is he's one of my favorite monarchs of all time because he's an absolute fucking weirdo. All right, I mean, we're talking about a man who enjoyed like killing an animal, cutting them open, and then like forcing himself into the entrails to feel the entrails around him. Uh, on the one hand, he's very socially awkward in some ways. They used to say that his tongue was too big for his mouth, so he tended to slobber. But at the same time, he's very intelligent, like a legitimate theologian of that time. Somebody could quote Bible verse back at you, multiple lines of it, and really debate the finer points of the Bible and the law as well. So a very, very intelligent man, but awkwardly, he's kind of rough, you know. So anyway, James the First was of course gay. He had a variety of gay lovers. There's some debate if him and Buckingham were lovers. I'm going to go ahead and say that I'd bet a few $100s on they are. Their letters to each other are it's the kind of stuff where it's like, without you, I don't know how I would live, sort of stuff,
Man.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds kinda
yeah, but
gay.
yeah. Now, what happened is Buckingham caught the king's fancy, and everybody always commented that they thought that Buckingham was very, very handsome and also very charming, charismatic, great taste in art too. So music and especially painting. So we're talking about a courtly, intelligent, very handsome and charming man. James essentially falls in love with him. And also, there were people in court who wanted Buckingham at that time to become James's favorite, so they could replace the king's current favorite at the time, which is Robert Carr, a man I know very little about, I must say. At any rate, James will keep promoting Buckingham through the ranks. Now, I mentioned them being lovers. Buckingham, though, had a good relationship with James's wife. But keeping in mind, James's wife, she knows he's gay. They essentially have sex so he can fill his royal duty of having an heir. That's what it's about. The really impressive one, though, is Charles, who the future Charles I. Buckingham and him become friends. Buckingham becomes one of his tutors in things like dancing, I want to say fencing as well. And James is trying to shop around for who is going to marry his son. And both Charles and Buckingham went to Spain on a special mission. The mission was a disaster, by the way. The Spanish even asked James to execute Buckingham over some stuff he did in Spain. But that whole trip, the adventure of it and everything, really bonded Charles and Buckingham together. Okay? Now, I say that, people might be like, are they gay? Probably not. I don't see any evidence for that at all. Should be kept in mind, Charles is one of the few monarchs who who had no affairs as far as we know, and no bastard children. Okay? So, anyway. Buckingham uses, of course, his position at court to enhance his reputation, but also to get his friends and family wealthy. And this means that he becomes increasingly unpopular. Now, James himself is coming under increasing attack because Parliament and the king are now starting to have the dispute that will eventually lead to the English Civil War. In a nutshell, Parliament is seeking to extend their power to what was the king's prerogatives, which is usually foreign policy. At the same time, James is trying to extend his prerogative to those of Parliament, that being taxation and domestic policy. So I say that because there's often a portrayal of especially by Edmund Burke types, that, the English Parliament was just sustaining traditional law and values in England, and it's really these nasty Stuarts who are trying to usurp power. I'm like, not true. Parliament was also extending its power beyond what it had been traditionally. It should also be kept in mind that the Stuart monarchs were the ones who really, the Tudors before them, were the ones who really started what I would call a centralization project, because this is when you're trying to get to the move towards more centralized monarchies, epitomized in Louis XIV. And if you look at Henry VIII essentially got whatever he wanted. And he wasn't really a true tyrant, but let's call him tyrant light. And Henry VII, Elizabeth I, Mary, all of them had their own ways of trying to extend royal power and their personal power beyond what it had been traditionally in England. And I feel like the Stuarts were just really doing what the Tudors were doing, but they were jacking it up, and also the Stuarts have less charisma. It also doesn't help you have the religious dimension. Now, Buckingham was himself Protestant, but there were always accusations that James and the Stuarts were kind of like crypto-Catholics, if you will. Now, you never mind that Guy Fawkes, the Catholic, tried to blow up Parliament with James in there, never mind that sort. Never mind that a Catholic fanatic tried to kill him. No, he's got to be a crypto-Catholic. The fact that James is trying to get Charles married to someone in Spain, most Catholic part of Europe, essentially. And then later on France, which does happen, Charles will marry Henrietta Maria, brings those accusations to bear. At any rate, Buckingham becomes associated with corruption. If you're going to attack James, instead of attacking the king directly, which can get you in trouble, attack his ministers. Very classic, right? If the law says you can't really criticize the king in such and such a way, well, the law doesn't say I can't criticize the king's butt boy, this being Buckingham. So that's how they go after him. So Buckingham's becoming increasingly unpopular. It probably didn't help that Francis Bacon was executed. Now, I mention that because Francis Bacon was Chancellor James I. He was an early ally and advocate of Buckingham, but when Bacon got in trouble, Buckingham didn't come to his aid. And the belief is that Buckingham sacrificed him because Bacon was being hit up over corruption. And Buckingham felt that if he defended him, they probably would have accused him of corruption. So better if they're attacking Bacon than attacking Buckingham. But once Bacon's dead, all the attacks come on Buckingham. Well, now it's going to get even worse. Buckingham, whatever we could say about him, and he definitely had skills at court, and he had a great taste in art. He is a corrupt motherfucker, though. And probably more to the point, he's militarily one of the most incompetent in all of English history. He will organize and lead a variety of expeditions. One of the most infamous is the landing in Spain around Cadiz. Complete disaster. The English lose like 60-something ships, thousands of soldiers. He'll then get involved in French affairs, where he attacks La Rochelle, which is where they had a Huguenot stronghold, and Richelieu was trying to take it down. Buckingham at first backed Richelieu, which that was controversial in England, because like, how dare you back the Catholics against the Protestants? You know, how dare you attack our fellow Protestants? And then within like a year or two, Buckingham is leading an expedition where they're attacking the French to help out the Huguenots. I mean, this is just incompetent. This is incompetence. He's not very good. And you have the military defeats, the accusations of corruption, the rumors of homosexuality, and all of this creates a toxic brew where Buckingham is increasingly a hated man. Now, James was dead, and of course, when Buckingham heard that, he was grief-stricken. I mean, I say that because I imagine some people at court might have been like, oh, Buckingham's just attached to James because of power. No, I think it's genuine affection there. He is distraught and depressed when James is dead. But Charles keeps him around because him and Charles are very close friends. And Buckingham is organizing another expedition. And then a gentleman named Felton walks in. All right. Now, Felton here was John Felton. He was a minor officer. He had served in a variety of the campaigns. He had not been promoted, and he was blaming Buckingham for that. He walks in and stabs him. Okay? Buckingham apparently was able to get up to chase him for a bit, but then dropped dead. Felton was immediately toasted as a hero across England. And when they executed him, they hung his corpse in Plymouth, which is where Buckingham had been murdered, and it became a site of veneration. That's how hated this man was. And I do think this is crucial because there's I would also mention this too, just saying a little more contemporary. There's a popularization right now of what could be called elite theory, which is that idea that elites set everything, and I do believe there's a lot of truth in that. But I also think that your elites have to be able to win enough popular support, and a guy like Buckingham did not. You know, if James and Charles and all their courtesans love Buckingham, and they do, it doesn't matter. The corruption, the incompetence, and the military disasters this man's involved in make him reviled. And there's essentially no way to make him into a heroic figure at that. Now, Buckingham's death in some ways is good for Charles because he tried to indict Buckingham twice, and Charles had called off Parliament twice to protect him. And one can see in the late 1620s, Charles is a young king, Buckingham's very unpopular, Parliament's coming for him. You can kind of see where you're building up to a government crisis. Buckingham's death actually makes it to where the crisis will happen in the 1640s instead of the 1620s. But it should be noted the other way that Buckingham is very important is that Charles being so loyal to a man who was so reviled meant that his reign already starts off on the wrong footing, if you will. And you know, I'm a bit of a Charles apologist in some ways, but I do agree that the man's political instincts were not very good. And his continued loyalty to Buckingham, while admirable on a personal level, is some very dumb politics, if you will.
And he said that Buckingham is an abysmal general.
Oh, he's terrible. Like he leads like 3 military expeditions that are all disasters. He's awful. Yeah, I mean, essentially, England is in their own way trying to get involved in the 30 Years' War, but they can't. And honestly, this Buckingham's failures. I did a professor who said that the English did so poorly at this period that for decades after, nobody in Europe took them seriously as a power. They just thought, oh, the English, I mean those guys who when they did landings at Spain and France, got their asses kicked. Who cares? You know, there's a whole argument to be made that essentially England is a second or third rate power through most of the 1600s. You know, now I say that. I mean, we could look at Cromwell. He had military success abroad, like the capture of Jamaica, and certainly the experience of the English Civil War had toughened up the soldiers and created the new model army. Eventually became a very proficient military force. But at least at this time, no. I mean, France, Austria, Spain, Sweden, those are the powerful militaries of this time, not the English. Emphatically not the English. And to be fair with Buckingham, he had a lot of problems raising money, poor training, but a lot of the stuff felt like vain military adventures. This is not a person who understood the limitations of the military force he had, nor did he have the organizational ability. I will say one thing though: one attack made on Buckingham by his enemies that he was a coward. He was definitely not a coward. All right, he did expose himself in combat, so that accusation is definitely false. But anyway, Mr. John Felton there. I keep wanting to say Tom Felton, but anyway, John Felton there is one of the few straight-up assassins I know of who is treated as a hero after murdering the guy.
Also, in 2018, there is now a new portrait of the assassination of the Duke of Buckingham. Are you aware of this?
No, what's the deal with it?
It should be on the screen right now, on the screen. It's from Finest Art America. This was just done a few years ago.
I see a woodcut. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, somebody did that in 2018?
It was uploaded in 2018. Maybe it's actually older than that. I'm not sure. But it's from Mary Evans, who I assume this is a contemporary person.
You gotta love all the over dramatic gestures, right?
Yeah. Then again, maybe this is way older. I don't know. It's probably from 1824. I don't know, but maybe it was from 2018.
Yeah, but no, Buckingham, very interesting. He's a character in the Three Musketeers, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently Felton murders him, and Felton's an agent of Cardinal Richelieu in the Three Musketeers universe, if you will.
That's an interesting theory. Yeah, I guess I love anytime somebody's an assassin, it must be a foreign power. It can't just be that there's some grievance or other cause.
Well, when we get to Garfield, we're going to talk about a few conspiracy theories at the time that just weren't true, right? But people believed it anyway because it fit their narrative.
All right. Well, I actually didn't really know much about the Duke of Buckingham, so it's pretty educational to me. Let's check our super chats real fast and see what else we got. Taco Cruiser, $2. Thank you, sir. Do you or Sean have any interest in the Imjin War?
I know almost nothing about it. I just know it's Japan versus Korea.
Oh, that okay? Because I know I actually just watched a thing on Netflix that dealt with the age of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa. So the Imjin War is something I'm interested in, but I don't really know that much about it. And in general, the Sengoku period of Japanese history I do find interesting. Although I'm much more interested in the Chinese Sengoku, the Three Kingdoms period.
No, that'd be worth looking more into.
Yeah, I'm planning on eventually doing tier list on the Three Kingdoms generals, because that's something I actually know a good deal about, but I'm trying to get more background information on the period as a whole. So that's been something I've been quietly working on and very slowly working on for months now, maybe up to a year at this point. It'll be a
Well,
little while before it's ready.
I gotta say, not as dramatic or as learned as yours, but for the Arnold stream, I figured out there's only like 11 or 12 of his movies I haven't seen, so I'm gonna watch all of them in the next 4 weeks to get ready, like the ones I haven't. All right.
Huh.
So just let you know, I'm getting ready for Arnold. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I gotta watch 300 Rise of an Empire sometime.
All right. All right. I gotta be straight. I actually like that movie.
Oh, really?
All right, but it ain't great. Like I'm not telling you like, oh man, it's fucking great. No, it's not. It's not. Okay, but I thought the music was very good. The ending credit music is fucking great. Like they did like their own version of War Pigs. I thought was awesome. And when they remember the whole 3D movie craze, they still do that a bunch in movies where they're like, it's in 3D, everybody. They still do that. Well, I got to say, I always joked when they were doing the 3D thing. I'm like, are we going to get a 3D rated R movie with breasts? And then I walked in. I'm like, yep, there's 3D breasts right now. And I was like, well, it finally happened. So, that's 300 Rise of an Empire for you. I liked it. I liked it more than 300. I did not like 300 at all. Like, at all. I thought that movie was, like, long and annoying and stupid. And
yeah,
Rise of an Empire.
Fan of 300.
Now, look, 300 Rise of an Empire is also long, annoying, and stupid, but I like the music. I dug it. I liked it. But it ain't great.
Yeah, because somebody said they'd pay me $100 to go through all of the historical fallacies in 300 Rise of an Empire.
It's obviously I'll say that, man. Those are obviously fantasy films, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting though. Like you're taking a creative point of view. You're taking a historical moment and trying and making it more fantastical. I always actually kind of like that aspect of both movies, But yeah. So yeah, I mean, fuck, they got like a scene in there where like Xerxes like puts himself in a pool and arises as like a fucking muscle bound Adonis, right? And shit. What else can be more fantasy?
It was supposed to be about Darius, though.
No, Xerxes.
Okay, well, I already know of one big flaw then, because Xerxes was not in charge of the Marathon campaign.
The movie's not about Marathon, though.
I thought it was about 490.
No, it's Salamis.
Really? Okay, I thought that... Oh, never mind. Okay, I didn't realize it was about Salamis. I thought it was about Never mind.
Actually, no. Marathon's in the movie. They show it at the beginning, and essentially the idea is that at Marathon, Darius dies, and Xerxes wants revenge on the Greeks for that.
Wow, that's pretty creative, because Darius definitely was not at Marathon.
Or I think he died at Marathon, the movie. I don't know. It's been like 7 or 8 years. Like, once again, I liked it, but I wasn't like, hey, man, we really got to watch this again. I was working the movie theater at the time. It was free. I just sat down and watched it, and I was enjoying it, right? But, there's like I think there's like a revenge thing to it. But I don't know. Maybe somebody in the chat's going to be like, no, Sean, you're wrong. And I'll be like, all right, cool. I never claimed to be a 300 expert.
All right. Well, next super chat is from Diogenes for $5. Thank you. What's the craziest serious political philosophy that y'all have ever heard of? I'd say ANCAPs, anarcho-primitivism, and egoist, especially based Max Stirner.
I've only just heard about Max Stirner. I don't know anything about him. I don't actually know anarcho-primitivists either. I've always considered ANCAPs to be morons.
Yeah. I think that they're definitely... They have to be considered on any short list.
And when I say morons, I mean whatever disagreements I might have with fascism or communism. I actually don't consider them morons.
Yeah, I mean,
like they do have realistic ideas on like power and trying to hold power. ANCAPs are just, I don't know, like it's like fairy dust or something.
Yeah, I've never heard an ANCAP say anything that made a whole lot of sense. I mean, it's sort of the combination of markets will regulate themselves with you can have a permanent power vacuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I just don't think has any basis in reality. Because I feel like if this was possible, it would have happened at some point. but there is no example of it.
Well, I think it's very. When I say idealistic, it presupposes that you can create a perfect world where this perfect system will work, right? But that world isn't going to happen because of the reality of power. Like you said, a power vacuum. The corporations want the government there. There's no reason for them to get rid of it, really.
Right.
They just want to make sure the government does X, Y, and Z for them. And then it's fine. It's good. And I mean, hell, corporations were more anti-government in the 70s and through the 90s. And that made sense. The government regulated them. It was leftovers of the New Deal coalition. But at this point, the corporations are essentially government boosters, because what does the government do against them? Practically nothing. They're like their handmaiden.
And if there's ever a union riot or anything like that, then the government will probably protect them.
Exactly. So Diogenes. There's lots of crap, and people would even argue about communism or liberalism or Nazism, whatever it is, all being crazy and But ANCAP's to me like it's fucking farcical. I mean. To me, it's like reading Jack and the Beanstalk and treating that as political philosophy. Seriously.
Yeah.
I pay them no mind at all.
All right, and we have one more super chat before we get back, and that is from Taco Cruiser for $5. Thank you, sir. What were the Macedonians doing during the Peloponnesian War? Well, the Macedonians were at first Athenian allies. Basically, Athens could reach them with their ships, and Athens at this time was at the peak of its power, so you didn't want to go against them. The king was making some money by trading timber to the Athenians, who were trying to maintain a fleet of over 300 ships, so pretty good business arrangement. Later in the war, they switched their allegiance to Sparta, and I want to say they actually had some point where they switched back to Athens temporarily before siding with Sparta until the end. But Macedon actually did not play a huge role in the war overall. Because Macedon, at this period in the Peloponnesian War, was not nearly as strong, and they were often preoccupied with fighting the Thracians and Illyrians. So they were not a huge factor. Although getting their support locally during northern campaigns in, say, the Chersonese was pretty damn useful. And also, as I mentioned, the timber supply was very important. So losing them as an ally is one of the major blows that Athens suffered in the late war, because they needed timber to keep their ships afloat, especially because after the Spartans got all the Persian gold and started building new ships, those new ships were a little more advanced and high quality than what Athens had in the field. So even though the Athenians had better crews, actually the Spartans had better ships. And they couldn't really upgrade their fleet because they weren't getting as much timber as they could have from Macedon. But good question. All right.
Yeah, very good.
Cool. Let's go back and talk about a man who was assassinated on the Ides of March. A man who is named Gaius Julius Caesar. So I suppose all of you know the basics of Caesar's life. He was a politician born around the year 100 or so BCE. He had been one of the major figures of the first triumvirate. He conquered Gaul, more or less. And by 44, he had taken control of the entire Roman Republic. He had just got done winning a 5-year-long civil war. And actually, he had won the last battle in the war at Munda in Spain the previous summer. And Munda had been his hardest fought battle, possibly his whole career. Casualties had been heavy, but ultimately the cause of the Senate/Pompeian faction had been completely destroyed. And Caesar had more or less brought Rome back into line. So Caesar had a policy of what was known as clementia, or clemency, mercy, something like that. And his policy was to pardon the enemies that he had defeated. The problem with his policy is that pardoning someone, according to the way ancient honor worked, was taking the higher ground. If I pardon you, it implies that I am superior to you. A man can pardon his slave. A slave cannot pardon his master. So, the people who were pardoned by Caesar, or some of them at least, felt that he was treating them in a condescending manner, that he was treating them as his subordinates. So there were some people who you might think would be grateful to him because he had left their estate intact, he had even let them keep their Senate membership, and he had not killed them after capturing them in a war. And at the beginning of that war, just in case you had forgotten, the Senate, led by people such as Cato the Younger, Pompey, Scipio, Metellus, and others, had decreed that Caesar should be put to death as an enemy of the state. So Caesar was being merciful, especially in that context. So he had enemies in that direction, no doubt. Another group to consider that is often overlooked are Caesar's own supporters. So you might think these guys helped him conquer Gaul and then fought a 5-year-long civil war. These are two of the most grueling campaigns imaginable. How could they be suspect? Well, these guys are also ambitious aristocrats. They did not want to live in the shadow of Julius Caesar. The prime example is Mark Antony. Mark Antony, despite being Caesar's right-hand man for a while, did not actually have a perfect relationship with Caesar. During the Civil War in 48, when Caesar had crossed over and was facing Pompey at Dyrrhachium, Antony was left in charge of Italy, and his task was to bring reinforcements. He actually wavered and considered not doing it and just leaving Caesar out to dry and then making peace with the Senate separately. But then he showed up, and Caesar ultimately won the campaign. Later on, in 45, there were people who were already plotting to kill Caesar, and they actually approached Antony and negotiated with him for a bit. Antony apparently never reported that and assumed the plot had died. Either that or he reported it and they dealt with it in some way and then there was a new plot. Not entirely clear. But Antony was far from 100% loyal. So that famous Shakespeare speech where he's crying over Caesar, if something like that did happen in real life, and I don't think it did, but if it had happened, those were crocodile tears. Mark Antony, while he saw Caesar as a useful vehicle for his own ambitions, was not all that loyal.
Huh. Okay.
So that's something to think about. Another one of the major conspirators who plunged a dagger into Caesar was Gaius Trebonius, who had also been someone who followed Caesar and really owed everything to Caesar. So there were some personal motives. People had ambitions that they thought Caesar might get in the way of. There was also a concern that Caesar was ending the Republic on some level, but that one's a little harder to substantiate. And the reason for that is because Caesar took no institutional measures to end the Republic. He was not planning a monarchy. Octavian was his heir, but only his heir in the normal sense. He would inherit his estate, because he was the closest thing he had to his son. As his grandnephew, that was the closest thing he had to his son. So Octavian would be a very wealthy man, and his name would become Gaius Julius Caesar, but he was not going to inherit an office, just a big estate and enough wealth to become a consul one day. So, if anything, Caesar was kind of winding down his power. If you look at the appointments he made for political offices for the next few years, he had his followers in office for 44. Actually, he was himself in office in 44, and he was looking to step down and hand over the consulship to another ally. But then in 43 and 42, the men slated to hold office were not all just toadies. He was planning on starting to share power again with people who were neutral or even people who had been hostile to him. So there's evidence that while he had stacked the deck some, to put his loyalists in the Senate, he had not fundamentally changed the nature of the Republic, at least not to the best of his intentions. And there's also a good reason to think that although it was not preordained and he had not appointed them without election, that in the year 41, the two men who would most likely hold the consulship would be none other than Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, the two most prominent of Caesar's assassins. And by the way, speaking of Caesar's friends, Marcus Brutus, the sort of face of the assassination plot, had been on Caesar's side since 48.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he had been a supporter, not just a guy who looked the other way, but an actual supporter. And when he was approached about assassinating Caesar because of his heritage as the descendant of not only the famous Brutus who killed Tarquinius Superbus, but also one of the other lesser-known assassins from back in that period, he had at first said, guys, we don't need to kill Caesar. He's one of the good men. I've known him for a long time. He and my mother have been lovers for a while. I've gotten to know him. Caesar's a good man. And he will eventually show us that he's a good man, and he'll come over to our side, everything will be cool. So, Brutus, if anything, slowed the plot down considerably. So, the question is, what were they actually trying to accomplish? And I have never really heard a compelling answer to that. Christian Meyer, who wrote a biography of Julius Caesar, is of the opinion that the assassins were convinced that as soon as Caesar dropped dead, that his legacy would be undone and everything would go back to normal immediately. And the reason he thinks that is because they made no preparations for any moves after the assassination. They just thought that they would present it to the public and everybody would say, okay, thank God the tyrant's dead. And I guess there was a little bit of reason to think like they did, though. Because there were times when Caesar would present things late in his life and the crowd would not cheer. So there's the famous instance where Antony, who was his consular colleague in 44, offered him a crown at a ceremony and Caesar turned it down. And people booed when Antony offered the crown, which led people to think that maybe it was an elaborately staged event. That Caesar was testing the waters. At the same time, though, he went out and said explicitly, do not offer me a crown, I don't want to be a king. And most likely he was not interested in taking a crown because this was very much frowned upon. The whole Republican tradition was literally just, we kill kings. Because the Republic was when the leading aristocrats killed the kings and took over the government themselves. That's what the Republic was. So, it's even possible, I guess remotely, that Antony might have been trying to subtly undermine Caesar by making him appear more monarchical. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah. So, Caesar was confirmed as dictator for life, I think in February. So only about a month before he died. And it's not because he was fundamentally different than Sulla, I would argue, in the sense that he did not want to end the Republic, just that he knew if he stepped down, he'd probably get killed. So he thought it would be best to go out on top. And part of the reason why he stacked the Senate the way that he did is because he wanted continued support for his war in Parthia. My evaluation of Caesar is that he wanted Rome to give him resources for him to fight foreign wars and try to become the Roman Alexander. I don't think he actually aspired to a crown.
I don't think so either.
If he had just lived and then died of natural causes or died in action, I think the Republic would have had a much better chance of surviving than with him being assassinated and rousing public sympathy for anyone who would don the cloak of Caesar, including Mark Antony, who, as we discussed, was not that loyal. Or Lepidus, who really wasn't that special either. Lepidus was probably more loyal, but really just not that great. And then Octavian, although he became great, was 19.
Yeah.
So he hadn't done anything.
Why did Caesar why did Caesar favor Octavian?
He
do you
was
think?
his nearest male relative,
That's what
at
it
least
was then?
who could
So it
become an
wasn't
heir.
so it wasn't anything like this kid's intelligent, he's gonna be a genius or
Well,
some
that's
shit,
that's
right?
why he latched onto him in the first place. But apparently, Octavian went with him to Spain for the Munda campaign, and they started to become close. And Caesar
Okay.
thought that he was very intelligent, and thought he was pretty cool. But at the same time, he's still a kid, and he's not the
Yeah.
healthiest guy in the world. So Caesar probably, if he had been planning on monarchy, would have been worried about having an heir who had health problems. But then
Mm.
again, Caesar himself had health problems, especially at this period. His epilepsy was getting worse, and apparently he offended the Senate pretty badly at one point because they came to announce a new honor for him and he didn't stand up to greet them. And later he said, I wasn't trying to disrespect you guys, I was having an epileptic episode and I couldn't stand. And it's not clear
Yeah.
which is the case. Christian Meyer, who has a very, very negative portrayal of Caesar, by the way, thinks that Caesar was intentionally insulting them because he was getting annoyed at all the unnecessary honors they kept showering him with. He found it a little bit embarrassing.
You were talking about the whole policy of clemency with Caesar. Do you consider that unusual for that time period?
Yeah, no one had ever really done it before. When Sulla defeated his enemies, he killed them, except for a few who sort of bought their way out or who he reconciled with in some other way. But for the most part, if you were Sulla's enemy, you got proscribed. And he wouldn't go super far with it. He wouldn't kill the whole family or anything. He'd just kill the person who was in the Senate opposing him or who was on the battlefield against him. Caesar wanted to have as little bloodshed as possible, at least in terms of nobles. I mean, he was cool with killing your legions and whatnot, but he was trying to keep the Senate intact because he wanted the Senate to confirm how awesome he was, I think. Especially the people he'd grown up with. He wanted them to say, Caesar, you're the best. Better than Pompey.
Yeah, I can see that, man.
At least that's my reading of Caesar.
I felt when I was first studying about this and reading like the Gallic War and all the rest, his tendency towards clemency struck me as unusual. I was expecting for somebody who, of course, had I don't want to say necessarily a negative reputation, but at least a more ruthless reputation. That's what I'd always been told, right?
Yeah.
I was struck by his leniency, really. At least in terms of fighting in the Civil War. And you're right, like Sulla, I mean, that was a bloodbath in Rome when he marched in.
Yeah, and partly it was that Sulla wanted to take care of his opponents. He thought he was going to set the Republic on the right footing by killing the bad people, and everything would be cool. Maybe in light of that, and also because he grew up as an anti-Sulla guy, because Caesar was still a teenager when Sulla marched into Rome, maybe just beyond his teenage years, and his uncle by marriage was Marius. So Caesar did not want to be seen as acting like Sulla. His whole thing would be, okay, we might both be dictators, but we are not the same.
Didn't he also consider Sulla to be politically not that smart?
Possibly.
Not that savvy?
Partly it was that Sulla, both of them were patricians, but Sulla was much more interested in the rights of patricians, whereas Caesar was more of a popularis.
Yes,
who was promoting a lot of new men around him. I mean, Gaius Trebonius was one of them, and there were many others, including the later consuls Pansa and Hirtius, who had been his generals and some of his generals in Gaul, and then both died as consuls fighting alongside of Octavian.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Caesar was not as snobbish about his patrician heritage as Sulla, even though his family was one of the very original patrician clans. Even if they had fallen on hard times for a while, the pedigree that Caesar had was pretty impeccable.
Okay.
And
the Mark Antony thing too is the idea that we have that Mark Antony is very loyal to Caesar. It's more of a Shakespeare creation,
I think so.
Is there
I think so.
Okay, but also what I ask is there a historian that puts that theory forward? Because I mean, I wasn't treating Shakespeare's history, but I thought Mark Antony was fairly loyal to Caesar, and you're calling into question that pretty. you're calling into a question with some compelling evidence, I'll say. But is there a historian who puts it forward as well?
I haven't really seen that many historians comment much on their relationship other than to say that Antony was a prominent supporter. I don't know how many people have really looked into depth on that relationship, and if anything, those would be Antony biographers rather than Caesar biographers, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of some of that until I was reading the Meyer section on the assassination. Christian Meyer is someone who I think his biography is probably the most brilliant biography of Caesar, and it's one that you absolutely have to read. That being said, I disagree with a lot of stuff in there, but in terms of somebody who really brings all the evidence and definitely sticks with his thesis, such as it is, I think Meyer is an example of one of those, like you were talking about, excellent biographies.
Yeah, my brother had a copy of Meyer. I've seen Meyer around a lot. What do you disagree with?
The central
Meyer?
thesis is that Caesar is a political outsider. That Caesar had sort of mentally divorced himself from the Republic from a young age, that he had no real regard for the traditions of the Republic, and that he saw himself as fundamentally different than everyone around him. And I think he's basing that on the fact that Caesar had somewhat of an aloof personality. And that Caesar could also be... he's also very willing to experiment and was not hidebound at all. So, for instance, when Caesar's dictator, he fixes the calendar. He just does it. A lot of other people could have potentially done it, but they were afraid of messing with tradition. Caesar says, no, our calendar's stupid, change it. And he did.
That's very Napoleon of him.
Yeah, and I mean, also, though, I don't know if that makes him an outsider, or if that makes him completely disrespectful of Rome's traditions. Because when he's preserving the Senate as dictator, he doesn't change offices randomly. And he also doesn't really change the way elections work or anything like that. So all he's doing is giving himself enough cover to do a big command in the East to end his life. He's not really looking to fundamentally reshape the Republic. He's just dealing with some obvious abuses or problems that annoy him personally. Caesar was the kind of guy who definitely liked precision and efficiency. So for him, having to add months at random and having that be a matter of debate was just stupid. So he said, okay, let's just create a rational calendar. So we'll have to add some months, but let's do it on a permanent basis rather than this confusing mess we have now. And so he did it. And for some of his contemporaries, that might have been a problem, not so much because he stole the thunder and created the Julian calendar, but because he made a lot of decisions that otherwise they would get to make. This would be something that they could negotiate when you have intercalary months. There we go. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud. Intercalary, where you add things into the calendar. But yes, intercalary months. So he effectively took away part of the Senate's power permanently, and also part of the ruling class's power, because all of the chief priests, spoiler, were also mostly senators. Caesar also was willing to try a few things other people weren't willing to try. He was a much more bold strategist than most. I've talked in the past about how he was a little on the reckless side. His strategy at Alesia was very high risk. Crossing over to Britain twice was high risk. Crossing into Germany across the Rhine was high risk. And also, his 2 crossings of the Adriatic in the face of naval opposition was rash and almost got him destroyed. And then he was almost destroyed at Dyrrhachium because he didn't have a supply line. So, I mean, Caesar was definitely a risk taker by nature. Very adventurous man. His last lover was Cleopatra, who was much younger. And in one naval battle, when he ran into trouble, he actually swam back to shore after his ship got wrecked.
Damn.
So
what
Caesar,
battle was that?
This would have been, I think, in 47. So this was when he was already in his 50s and getting up there. But yeah, Caesar was very physically vigorous, fought in the front lines. Tons of charisma.
Oh yeah, he's one of the finest frontline commanders in all of history.
Yeah, so I feel like if he had not been assassinated, the Republic would have had a better chance of survival. So I think that the assassination of Caesar was ultimately one of the catalysts of the Republic's downfall. One of the things which made it inevitable. Although I don't know how much longer it would have gone on, because clearly there were men who could not be confined within the bounds of the Republic. Sulla and Caesar had both run across the problem of the bounds of the Republic are too restrictive, however, I want to preserve the Republic without observing its norms, but preserving them so other people after me have to. So it's this very hypocritical stance both of them took.
Oh, most certainly. And yeah, I mean, eventually you're going to get somebody like. I mean, I would say in my own readings, the Republic is not fully repudiated until Caligula, really. Like, he's the one who just says, it's a joke, right?
Yeah, I mean, because Tiberius knew not to do that. Augustus would have never done that because he was just saying, what do you mean? I've restored peace to the Republic, which is totally still a thing.
And, yeah, I mean, Tiberius is, I mean, he's not as... He's not as how shall I say dexterous. Doesn't have much dexterity as Augustus, political dexterity, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's really going to be Caligula who fucking flouts the ship and just says, whatever, it's a joke. My horse is now the senator.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm pretty sure when he said that he wasn't talking about a real intention. He was just being sarcastic because. He was a young man. He had very little experience because Tiberius was pretty suspicious in his later years and wasn't going to give any of his relatives power. So when Caligula comes to office and at the age of 24, he has no real experience. He goes to the Senate, the old men, this advisory body, and he says, "Hey guys, I don't know what to do. Can you help me?" And then they just sit there like assholes. Because the way the empire works is that the emperor tells people what he wants to hear in private, and then they go in public and say it. So the empire depends upon the emperor knowing what he's doing and knowing what he wants. Caligula wants them to function the way they're supposed to, and they're afraid to, because if they give real advice, and it turns out to be what he doesn't want, they might pay the penalty for it. Mm-hmm. So he eventually mocks them for being cowards and for being useless. And then he's offended their honor and they want to kill him. So then when Claudius takes over, he's very good at working with the Senate because he sees what happens when you're not. And Claudius is a man who does have some experience because he started getting experience under Caligula. Caligula had to turn somewhere, so he turned to his uncle Claudius. And also, Claudius was a well-read man. He was a little older and had some political instincts, even if he had never had a chance to use them before. He had been shelved as a young man because he had the tendency to drool and he had a limp, so Augustus thought that people would never accept him or take him seriously in politics because he had some physical defects, which, according to the belief at the time, meant that the gods didn't favor him.
Yes.
But ultimately, Claudius was one of the best politicians out of that whole family.
Most definitely. Do you want to go to Garfield, or we got more to say?
Let's see. Was there anything else I need to say about Caesar? One of the other things that he did that might have pissed people off and that might have inspired the conspirators. So I mentioned that he had appointed consuls for 43 and 42, and then after that it would be open. Well, one of his super unpopular ideas was that when he left Rome to go to Parthia, he would step down as consul and appoint his good friend Delabala as his replacement. And this would be controversial because his colleague already, Mark Antony, was too young to be consul technically at 38. To be consul, you're supposed to be 42. Antony was only 38. And Delabala would have only been 24 years old.
Okay, wait. Pardon me. Who the fuck is Delabala?
He's just one of Caesar's close allies. Caesar became good friends with him sort of late in the Civil War and was really impressed by him and wanted to make him consul because he thought he was awesome.
I'm sorry, why have I never heard of this guy? And also, he's got a stupid name. Delabala?
Yeah. Or I guess you could call him Dolabella if that makes you feel better.
Delabella. I'm going to do that one, man. You
Well,
should
anyway,
do a video on this guy.
I'm
I've
thinking about
never
it.
heard
I
of
need
him.
to look more. I need to look him up more. I had never really heard of him too much either. But so Caesar's talking about keeping the Republic going, restoring traditions. I mean, having Antony as consul's one thing. He's fairly close to the age, and he's got a lot of experience. And he was also master of horse. So, yeah, that's stretching it a bit, but okay. Also, Antony came from a well-established family. Antony's grandfather had been the great orator Antonius. His father had done some stuff. He had an uncle who had done some stuff. Actually, his uncle was one of the Catilinarians, I think. But anyway, he came from a family with a long tradition of senatorial service. Delabala, maybe less so. Anyway, this would have pissed people off.
God damn it, man.
Also, you know what date Caesar was planning to leave Rome for Parthia?
What, March 15th?
March 18th.
Ah, okay.
And that morning, he was sick. He probably had a hangover because he was at a party the night before, where he was at Lepidus's house, and supposedly, while he was working on stuff and they were all talking and drinking, the subject arose, how would you like to die? What would be the best way? And Caesar opined that the best way to go would be suddenly and unexpectedly.
Okay.
So in about 12 hours later, that happened. And if I had to guess, he probably had a hangover the next morning because it was a drinking party. Almost didn't go. He did go. And then two people tried to warn him. One of them was a Greek philosopher or sophist or something like that who handed him a scroll. We don't know what was on it. It could have been something completely irrelevant. And after that, he was warned by a soothsayer that the Ides of March have come, and he needs to beware of the Ides of March. Or maybe the guy had told him that before, and then Caesar said, well, the Ides have come, I'm still here, but the Ides have not passed. And Caesar said, okay, whatever, superstitious fool, I'm Pontifex Maximus, I'll tell you what's what, and then walked off. And then the conspirators, who most of whom were actually his friends, who people he had known a long time, people he had pardoned, given positions to, were approaching him about some other guy asking for clemency, and Caesar said, no, that guy doesn't get clemency, he's a dick. And then they started stabbing him. And each conspirator stabbed him once. There were 23 of them, at least on the site. And they killed him right then and there. He famously pulled his cloak over his head so no one would see his face as he died.
Yeah. Very well done in the HBO series.
And this was at the Theater of Pompey, and Caesar died under the statue of his old rival. Which is pretty
that's always
ironic.
Yeah, no, that's always been a very poetic turn to it. You know, his friend turned rival, who he had just barely vanquished, but of course had defeated. That statue of Pompey. Do we know how long it would have lasted in Rome?
I think it lasted for a long time, and I think an earthquake eventually took it out.
Okay, just curious.
Which is what happened to
that.
most of the statues, but so that was all pretty ironic. And then one of the guys who had been more or less trying to urge a lot of people to do assassinations but would never participate, and had nothing to do with that plot, was Cicero. Because Cicero was a physical coward. However, Cicero critiqued the assassins by saying that they had demonstrated the courage of men but the foresight of boys, because they had no second move. It was just kill Caesar and then everything is cool.
Well, that's kind of like the people who stormed the Capitol building, right?
Basically, yeah. Except
No
in this
second
case,
move.
it was actually legit planned and debated by people who had experience in government. People who legitimately had served as consul or praetor or general of some kind or other, or tribune. And then this was the best plan they could come up with. Maybe it was a consensus problem where if you have 23 chefs in the kitchen, you end up with bologna sandwiches.
Well, I mean, ultimately, whatever their plans are, like you're saying, they have divergent ones. But also, if it is theoretically, just saying, if it is like we're going to restore like the Republic, the faith in the Republic has already taken so many body blows.
Yeah, because
it's
I mean,
kind of hard to rally around it.
There were people in Caesar's camp, at least common people and soldiers, who were much more loyal to Caesar than they were to the Senate. And also, keep in mind, there are legions being raised right now under arms, even though a lot of the legions have been decommissioned recently and settled. But there are a lot of men under arms because they're 3 days away from beginning a major war. And these legions are raised by and paid by Julius Caesar. So unless you have a plan for getting those legions to come to your side and not make war against you and avenge their master, your plan sucks.
God.
Yes, anyway, it was just a shit show, and again, I think it was completely counterproductive. They would have been better off at achieving their aim if they had left Caesar to die of natural causes. Although Christian Meyer disagrees with that. He thinks that no matter what, Caesar's succession would have been a civil war for control and replacement of his position. I don't agree, though. But
You don't agree, but it is a worthy debate. I can see the other point, too.
yeah.
You know, let me go refill my water real quick, and we'll get into James A. Garfield.
Okay. No. Sulla's reforms never had a real chance.
I was about to say, I just got my water, and I was like, that is some hella dead air we got here, you know?
Yeah, I was just reading through a few of these.
Do you have any super chats you want to answer right quick?
We do have one real fast. It's by Taco Cruiser, $5. Thank you. Do you have any opinions or theories on what happened to Germanicus? That would be Caligula's father, who was also the heir apparent for a while under Tiberius. I know that when he died, this was basically the JFK assassination of the ancient world, in the sense that almost everyone believed that something untoward had happened. And because at the time, if I'm not mistaken, Tiberius' son Drusus was alive, there were a lot of people who thought that Tiberius had ordered an assassination. That being said, go ahead.
No, just that's kind of the dramatic theory, if you will, put forward by I. Claudius.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Tiberius would have done something like that simply because Germanicus was extremely popular and, unlike himself, was a direct descendant of Augustus. So that's part of why Germanicus was so popular, because Augustus didn't have that many direct blood descendants. A lot of the people in his family were in-laws, including Tiberius, who was the son of Livia, Augustus' wife, by a different husband.
Mm-hmm.
So Germanicus in that way was kind of untouchable. And Germanicus was a fairly good general, so he was winning some credit, he had a lot of charisma, and he was out in the provinces representing Tiberius and doing it pretty well. So he was making sure the legions were taken care of, he was doing inspections, leading campaigns, avenging the campaign of 14, where the 3 legions were destroyed under Varus. So Germanicus hadn't done anything to warrant that kind of treatment. And Tiberius did make sure that Germanicus' son, Caligula, was taken care of. Even after Germanicus' widow effectively accused him of being behind it. And also, a lot of it was just because Tiberius was not a charismatic guy. He was pretty dour, unlikable, whereas Germanicus was beloved, so people wanted to believe the best about the one and the worst about the other. It's also worth mentioning that Germanicus was extremely dramatic. At one point, he bared his throat or his chest to the men and when they were complaining about something, basically saying, "If you have such a problem with it, kill me now. I die for the Empire." And basically the soldiers didn't take him seriously. They kind of laughed at him and told him to calm the fuck down. So he got mocked at one point by the soldiers for being melodramatic.
So that's the opposite of the Napoleon thing, when he's on the 100 Days, when he's like, soldiers, shoot your emperor, if you will, right? When he bares his chest before them, that actually works. They react to him.
I don't know. In this case, they were like, dude, calm the fuck down. We're not all that angry with you, and we're not going to kill you. We just have a grievance. Anyway, it's kind of funny that he did that. And that's why a lot of people say it's interesting that he's such a hero in the tradition. But if anything, he had a lot of his son's personality. The drama and everything. Anyway, last super chat for now before we get to Garfield. $2 from Vaza. Thank you, sir. Will Jeff Epstein be the last person discussed tonight? No, he will not.
Yeah, we're not delving into the murder of Jeffrey Epstein right now.
Also, Epstein, honestly, is not all that historically significant.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't see him as all that significant in the grand scheme of things.
I don't think he's as historically significant as the people we're talking about right now. But I do actually believe that his murder is quite significant within the last 10 to 20 years. I do believe that.
I mean, in this era and in the 21st century so far, yes. But I mean, I don't know if it's definitely not on par with any of the people we're talking about tonight.
No, most certainly not James Garfield, right?
Right, President James Garfield. Yes,
the one of the two presidents, three presidents that when we rated them, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do Harrison, Garfield, or Trump. We'll get to Trump now that the term is over, of course. But yeah, Garfield, I couldn't rate him because he wasn't in office long enough. He essentially got shot right after he had settled himself politically. So let's get into James A. Garfield. Okay. If you went to somebody in 1878 and said Garfield will become president, I don't know if they'd laugh at you, but they probably wouldn't believe you. Okay?
Okay.
So what had happened is Ulysses Grant had his 2 terms as president. The second term was a disaster. The corruption and the scandals had built up to such a point to where there was a mass revulsion against Grant. This leads to the ascendancy of Rutherford B Hayes, of course. Anyway, Rutherford B Hayes tries to he wants to win over Democrats and the South. So he actually appointed Democrats to his cabinet and other key positions. And he was also generally against the spoils system. The spoils system at this point was a major part of political debate. Were you for or against the thing? Right. And the Republican Party becomes split between 2 groups called stalwarts and half-breeds. Now, Mark Summers would say that split really didn't exist, at least the way that's presented. All it was pro or anti-Hayes. If you were pro-Hayes, you weren't into waving the bloody shirt, which is to say you weren't into let's go refight the Civil War all over again. You were going to be for civil service reform. And if you're anti that, then you are all for machine politics and the rest. But there's also a personal dimension. Because 2 of the most powerful, actually argument of the 2 most powerful Republican politicians, once Grant's no longer president, absolutely hate each other. That's Roscoe Conkling and James G. Blaine. Remember James G. Blaine?
I do.
Yes, Blaine. Blaine, James G. Blaine, the continental liar from the state of Maine. Roscoe Conkling, though, Interesting guy. He was very handsome, as they say, wasp-waisted, with a large chest, notorious womanizer. He's, by the way, also the man who invented the idea of corporations are people.
Oh God.
Yeah, it comes from him. Yeah, no, he after he spent in the 1880s. He became America's premier corporate lawyer. Anyway, so Conkling and Blaine hate each other. Neither one of them actually like Rutherford B Hayes, although Conkling really doesn't like Hayes. And when you go into 1880, you have three different people who are putting forward. The three major nomination candidates are Ulysses S. Grant, because Conkling and the stalwarts like John Logan, who was, of course, a very successful Union general, their idea is the South is getting unruly. The country could fall apart at any moment. We need a strong man in charge. We need to bring Grant back. Grant's awesome. Also, Grant doesn't mind when we steal shit, so it's cool.
Yeah.
So let's bring Grant back. Blaine can't join with him, even though Blaine himself, in many ways, is a stalwart. He's all for machine politics and spoils. He's very corrupt, and at the same time, Blaine was himself did not support a lot of what Hayes was doing. But Blaine can't go with Conkling. So Blaine, being the flexible politician he is, butters up the liberals, the reformers is a better way to put it. So it's going to be Blaine versus Grant. Then you have John Sherman. Now that's the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, John Sherman has one of my favorite nicknames for a politician ever in American history. Get this: the Ohio Icicle.
Damn.
Yeah, what a nickname! I fucking love it. The Ohio Icicle. So John Sherman was a very pro Hayes guy. So if you believe the Rutherford B Hayes is a good man and his policies are worth it, Sherman's who you're going to back. So anyway, these three men, Grant, Sherman, Blaine, they're not going to be at Chicago, okay, where the nominating convention is. They're going to have surrogates there. Grant's surrogate is Conkling. Pardon me, I don't remember Blaine's surrogate off the top of my head. And John Sherman's surrogate is James Garfield. He's the one managing his candidacy. Well, you start getting arguments and debates and constant voting. Garfield gave a speech where he actually barely mentioned Sherman, but Garfield looked good in the speech. And the people who backed Grant, they wouldn't turn away from Grant, but so many people were like, oh my God, Grant was corrupt and incompetent. Also, a third term? Really? I mean, 2 terms were fine for George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Andrew Jackson, right?
Yeah.
And this fucker wants a 3rd term? The gall on him. So the Grant people can't draw enough votes in. And suddenly politicians start throwing votes to Garfield randomly. And, from what I've read, Garfield actually tried to shoot that down, and it didn't work out. More votes start going to him. Not many at first. We're talking like 1, 2, 3, eventually gets to 15. And then Blaine starts to realize that people aren't going to rally to them. Now, one of the problems Blaine has is that because Blaine is trying to get the half-breeds on his side, but Blaine himself is not much of a half-breed, right? So the half-breeds don't trust Blaine. They trust Garfield, though. Garfield is definitely one of their men. And so Blaine concocts a scheme to where Garfield will become the president, become the nominee. And then Sherman acquiesces to that, and lo and behold, James A. Garfield wins the nomination. Now, Grant, Conkling, Logan, Platt, and the rest of them, all the stalwarts, they at first will not back Garfield. Now, Garfield, as an olive branch to them, tries to get Levi Morton as his vice president. He turns him down. Then he goes to Chester A. Arthur. Now, Chester Arthur is interesting. Chester Arthur was elected to nothing. He was a prominent member of the New York militia during the Civil War, so he took no active part in the conflict, but he did help organize troops and supplies for the Union Army. And Arthur was then collector for the port of New York. which is the most lucrative patronage position you can have. Now, people liked Arthur. Arthur was affable, tall, very, very well dressed, well mannered, and he is Conkling's best friend. The two hang out all the time. Garfield goes to Arthur and says, "You want to be my vice president?" And Arthur is kind of thinking like, "Dude, all I've been is a militia general and a collector for a port. Like, I've not been elected to anything." Right?
Yeah.
So Arthur's actual reaction was, "The vice presidency is an honor that I never thought I would ever attain." So he's very like, "Wow, I could be vice president? I never thought I'd be vice president. Holy shit." He goes to Conkling and says, "Hey, he wants to make me vice president." And Conkling essentially is like, "Don't accept it. That guy's an asshole." And Arthur essentially went like, "No, I'm going to take it."
So it's kind of like when they're having the Veep stakes, and there were some people who are fairly low-level politicians, at least for being considered for that, such as Stacey Abrams, and then they started to get hopes that were way beyond any reasonable expectation.
Yeah, no. Arthur is, it's yeah. That's a good way to put it. And you know, Arthur accepts. It's not enough though. Eventually, though, Conkling is brought in, and Conkling and Grant meet with Garfield, and they campaign for him. By the way, Grant is the first ex-president to go on the campaign trail for somebody running for president. But it took some time for Grant and Conkling to come around to Garfield. But they do. Okay, so Garfield wins by the skin of his teeth against Winfield Scott Hancock. You know, very, very close election. For many reasons. One of them, of course, is the fact that Hancock was such a successful Union general. So the Republicans couldn't be like, "He's a Confederate traitor." It's like, no, you really can't do that. It's Hancock. He's one of the superstars of the Union Army. Now, by the way, I did find out Grant said a bunch of negative shit about Hancock, which is hilarious because if you look at contemporary writings from the Civil War and Grant's memoirs, his comments on Hancock are always positive. But Grant, being the good Republican he is, says that Hancock's the most vain, ambitious man I know. And he's selling the country out. He was once a great soldier, but now he's a traitor.
What the fuck?
Yeah, no, it's fucking terrible stuff. Hancock, of course, was very hurt by this.
I bet so.
But anyway.
I mean, shit.
Well, to be fair, Grant and Hancock had argued over Reconstruction, much as Grant and Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, that is, had argued over Reconstruction. So that should be kept in mind. Yeah, William Tecumseh Sherman, of course, backed his brother for president. Just keep that in mind, all right? At least for the nomination fight. Anyway.
Yeah, and I guess Grant probably wouldn't take that too personally, though, since it was his brother.
I got to tell you, just a quick aside, like the Grant-Sherman relationship once Grant becomes president is weird. Like they're still kind of friends, but they don't really hang out much, and they actually will support politicians that are against the other one, if you will. And Sherman gets so disgusted with Washington, D.C. that he moves to St. Louis, Missouri. So it's a very weird relationship at that point. I mean, these men had been so tied together during the war, had become friends, and of course, both of them are synonymous with Union victory. But it's a strained relationship until you get after the 1880 election, I would say. Then I think Sherman and Grant start to become more friendly to each other again. But yeah, it's very strained in the 1870s. But anyway, I mean, you got a point there, of course, about Sherman. He is backing his brother, of course,
Yeah.
The Ohio Icicle. What a great name, the Ohio Icicle.
It doesn't sound like a great name for someone who's trying to win votes, though.
Yeah, but it's crazy. John Sherman was in politics for decades. I mean, he becomes a senator in 1860. He's an early backer of Abraham Lincoln, back when Lincoln's sort of a dark horse. He's one of his backers, and becomes a senator in 1860. And he's prominent in politics all the way to 1890s. So we're talking about a guy who's a major politician for over 40 years.
Damn.
But he's the Ohio Icicle? Yeah, you're right. You're like, this guy, he doesn't have a ton of charisma. Why the fuck does he keep hanging around?
Was he the Mitch McConnell of that period, or?
I don't know if I would say that. He is the Sherman Antitrust Act was the one that he put forward, of course.
Oh,
Uh,
that he's that Sherman.
yeah, that's John Sherman.
All right.
Yeah.
Ohio Icicle. Badass.
I do consider, I personally consider him one of the 5 or 10 greatest American politicians never to make president, much like Blaine and Henry Clay and Bryan. Yeah, I put Sherman up there because he is a big. His 40 years, he's a big player the entire time. He's never minor, But anyway, getting back to what goes on. Okay, so Garfield barely beats Hancock. Now he's president. Conkling and Grant immediately are like, "Hey, we want this person in charge and this person and this person." Blaine, though, is like, "Hey, I'm the guy who actually got you the nomination." Also, Blaine and Garfield by this time have a budding close friendship. So Blaine essentially says, "Fuck Conkling, fuck Grant. We're going to go with my appointees." And his actual, I love this line Blaine had. He wrote a letter to Garfield where he said, "With the Conkling people, we must slit their throats with a feather."
Well.
Yeah, so he's like, "We'll freeze them out of most of the top patronage positions," which the big ones are Secretary of the Interior, Treasury, and what's the other one? Not State. State was always seen at that time as the unofficial advisor to the president, which Blaine will become. But yeah, Secretary of Interior, Treasury, and sorry, I can't remember the other one.
Maybe agriculture or
No, agriculture doesn't exist at the time. Postmaster General. That's it. Those are the 3 most coveted cabinet positions because those have the most patronage power. So anyway, Blaine is putting forward his men. Conkling and Grant, I mean, it gets pretty bad. One of Grant's biggest allies was a guy named Adam Badeau, who wrote a biography of Grant. It's absolutely terrible, like as a historical resource. I mean, it's just Grant propaganda. It's practically worthless. But Badeau and Grant are very, very close, and Badeau was the U.S. minister to Britain. And Garfield moved him out of that and made him minister to Denmark. And so Grant is essentially saying, like, I'm insulted. And Conkling is like, this is a bunch of bullshit. And then, for collector for the Port of New York, Garfield chooses a guy named Robertson, who Grant and Conkling despise. I mean, this is a straight-up slap in the face. Well, Conkling and his fellow New York Senator, Tom Platt, in protest, resign. The resignation, they're thinking, because they're so powerful, that resignation will make it to where they won't have to vote for Robertson, but also the thing about that at the time is the Senate was split. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The Senate at that time was split, 37 Republicans, 37 Democrats. So their thought was, if we drop out, the Republicans don't have a majority enough to put Robertson in charge. Well, enough Democrats defect because they're like, yeah, fuck it. We want to piss off Conkling. We hate this guy. So it goes through, right? That night, there's a gentleman in Washington, D.C. who's having a very, very troubled sleep. His name is Charles Gateau. Do you know much about Charles Gateau?
I do not.
Absolute weirdo. I mean, look up his picture. I mean, he looks nuts. He's out there.
Charles
Gateau was he's a lawyer and theologian. He joined the Oneida colony, which had was essentially a free love colony. So this is a colony where you go to get laid, essentially. Charles Gateau cannot get laid. In fact, apparently at the Oneida colony, the name Gateau becomes synonymous with we're not fucking. Like, he becomes the slang in the colony for no sex.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's a failed lawyer, failed theologian.
His eyes look completely insane.
Yeah, he's totally he's nuts. He's nuts, man.
And these look like fake contact lenses.
Dude, 1880 though, he essentially went. Okay, so there's something called the Fifth Avenue Summit, if you will, which is when Conkling and Garfield and their people are meeting to hash out disagreements so that Conkling will back him, right? Gateau just rolls in there and is like, hey, I've written this speech. It's a pro-Garfield speech. It's pretty badass. You need to check this out, right? And actually, people at the thing were like, yeah, it's a pretty good speech. The problem was when Gateau would go to give the speech, either nobody showed up. One time, a lot of people did show up for a speech that he gave, but then he actually had a breakdown like 5 paragraphs into it, and he just stopped speaking. The only place apparently where he gave an effective speech was Vermont, but Vermont doesn't matter. Vermont is solidly Republican, not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, but Gateau, being the delusional man that he is running around Washington D.C., going to guys and saying like, "I deserve a patronage position," but he doesn't say something minor like, make me the postmaster general of Crawfordsville, Indiana. He says, I need to be the ambassador to France or Austria. Which you got to think, like those are 2 of the top 5 ambassador positions in the world, right? Like Britain, Russia, France, Austria. Germany, I guess. Well, no, Germany's thinking. Yeah, Germany or Italy, right? Like those are your top ones. Not this shit he's asking for. And he was so annoying that even Blaine, and Blaine was always known for being very courtly, the kind of guy who doesn't want to piss people off. Blaine actually yelled at him to get away. And I remember reading that in the book, and I was like, holy shit, Blaine snapped at somebody? And actually, when Blaine snapped at him, he didn't apologize, because that's not the way he is. But the fact that he snapped is telling. Well, Gateau had met various Republicans, mostly who were stalwarts. Now, how'd they react? Okay, Grant kicked him out of his home. Grant was like, get the fuck out of here. You're a nut job, all right? John Logan said, yeah, that guy's crazy. I don't want to be around him. Benjamin Harrison kind of liked him. Later on, Benjamin Harrison would be like, yeah, I didn't like the guy. He was a nuisance. But I'm like, the evidence shows that actually Harrison hung out with him more than others. And Arthur just kind of was like, oh, yeah, he's around. He's a supporter. He's very enthusiastic. I like his speech. We'll give him a shot. The shot didn't work out. Anyway.
Well, the shot worked out for one person, just not the other.
True. Gateau, the night that Conkling and Platt go down, and everybody's making fun of them. They're being mocked. Cartoons are being written. Gateau is awake in his home and in the hotel he's staying in, and he can't go to sleep, and he suddenly gets a vision, an epiphany, that if he shoots James Garfield, everything will be better. Because if he doesn't, the Confederates are going to take over again. He actually writes that if only somebody had shot Jefferson Davis in 1860 and his compatriots, all could have been avoided. Well, sir, I'm going to go shoot Jefferson Davis, essentially. I will shoot Garfield. He does say over and over again in his letters, he says, I have nothing against Garfield personally. I think he's a fine man, but he is going to destroy the Republic with what he's doing. So I must get in there and kill this man. And he plots it out over those weeks. And he also, being the theologian was and being very God-obsessed, he was like, if I am not meant to do this, then let God strike me down. All right. Well, Garfield wins his fight with the Conkling crowd. Platt, by the way, I mentioned Platt. He was the other New York senator. He gets caught in a hotel fucking some woman, so he's out. Conkling is begging for votes. And the thing about Conkling was he was very charismatic, but he also tended to snap at people and could be a bully. So as soon as his power was waning, lots of people were like, yeah, fuck him. They're throwing him overboard. They don't want him. So Conkling's begging for votes to get his Senate seat back. And on July 2nd, 1881, Charles Gateau walks into a train station because he's got it planned out. He sees Garfield and shoots him twice. He, by the way, declared after being shot, I am a stalwart, and Arthur will be president.
What?
Yeah, well, think about it. He thinks these people are his friends, even though Grant kicked him out of his home, right? He's like, yeah, Grant's cool. Harrison's like my best bud. I want these guys to be in charge.
Jesus.
Yeah, I am a stalwart.
He's a guy who belonged to a free love society and couldn't get laid.
He belonged to the free left side. He couldn't get laid. He's a terrible lawyer. He wrote a decent speech, but he can't deliver it. He's completely delusional and thinks that his speech entitles him to be the ambassador to two of the most powerful countries in the world, right?
Yeah. Now that you mention he's a lawyer, you know who I'm thinking of in terms of an analogy of people we've met.
Yes, I know who you're thinking of.
Yeah.
The thing with this though is like, he wasn't. It wasn't. Here's one thing that's very important though. The when this happens, the stalwarts like not as much Conkling, but like Logan and Grant and the rest at Platt, they really try to portray it as Gateau was a disappointed office seeker and he's crazy. He did not kill Garfield because he didn't get an office. He killed Garfield because the stalwarts were losing power, and he believed the stalwarts were his friends, and the only way the Republic would stay together. So he wasn't thinking like, I didn't get a job, I'm going to shoot you. He was actually thinking almost like a John Wilkes Booth type, right? Like, if I kill this man, the Republic will be saved.
So he had the same thought process as the assassins of Caesar.
Yes, or in some ways Buckingham, right? Like
a
disgruntled minor man who says this person is the enemy, and if I kill them, all will be right.
We're a couple of gunshots away from Nirvana.
Exactly. Garfield, by the way, was recovering from the wounds inflicted. Problem is, Garfield's physicians bickered, and they did some stupid stuff, man. Like they didn't allow him any visitors. They put curtains over his bed, so all he saw was black for days and days on end. And they kept probing his body looking for the bullet. Because they said we got to remove the bullet, you know?
Yeah.
They even called in Alexander Graham Bell with a metal detector to go find the bullet. Like,
what?
Yeah, well, Alexander Graham Bell had just invented a metal detector. So like, hey, come here and look for the bullet, you know? But, fun fact, apparently one of the first air conditioning units ever set up was created for Garfield while he was in bed, and they were looking for this, while he was in bed being treated. The Navy engineer set up an air conditioning unit. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd been cooler if he would have survived, and then you could say the air conditioning played a role in his recovery, but...
Oh, dude, one of the best parts is after he died, the lawyer, like the doctors were still like, hey, we need somebody to pay our fees. Now that is some fucking moxie, all right?
Yeah, that does take some balls to say, yeah, we failed to save the president due to our own incompetence, but we do expect to be compensated, so here's our address. Go ahead and put that check in the mail. Address it to me, please.
Garfield died. He actually died on the anniversary of the Battle of Chickamauga. At that battle, he was chief of staff to William Rosecrans. Arthur now becomes president. Arthur's very interesting. I was actually one of my friends who was at the birthday stuff I was at today. Yeah, by the way, I'm 39 now, just saying. So she was, she likes Biden a decent amount. I'm pretty negative on him, but I was like, hey, I think from what I can see, the stimulus thing that's been passed is good. I like the fact that it wasn't too watered down and other stuff, so I'm giving credit here. And she was very much like almost had a "see, I told you so" kind of thing. But I was like, hey, look, I told you. I'm not making any judgments about the man. Then I thought, wait, what about Chester A. Arthur? Now, if you thought of Chester A. Arthur before he became president, and thought he'd make a good president, people would have laughed at you. And he was considered a crony's crony. He's never been elected to anything. His position completely because he's friends with wealthy politicians. And he's known to be corrupt. So, people across America were like, oh my God, I can't believe Arthur's going to be president. Right? They're like, a crook's crook is in charge in some people's minds.
So would the level of horror have been the same if, say, Dan Quayle had taken the oath?
Oh God, that's a That's a great question, man. I don't know about that. That's good, but that's good though. What about Spiro Agnew?
Yeah. God damn. I think Spiro resigned before Nixon, though, right?
He did. But there's absolute horror that Arthur is going to become president. He's considered just a crony, and Arthur really steps up. Now, some of that Arthur probably understood that he couldn't be a stalwart because in the aftermath of Garfield's death, there were rumors that him and Conkling and Grant had either planned for Gateau to kill him, or that their anti-Garfield rhetoric, because all three of them hated him so much, had goaded a man like Gateau into killing him. And Arthur understood that if he ruled as a stalwart, he would never be treated legitimately. He was receiving death threats constantly. At the same time, Arthur was genuinely moved by Garfield's shooting, his suffering, and his death. The story is that when Arthur was told that Garfield died, he just broke down and sobbed for hours. And part of that also is because he's like, oh my God, I'm now president. What the fuck? Right?
Yeah.
Like, seriously, in 1878, somebody said Chester Arthur would become president of the United States. They would have been like, get the fuck out.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of like with the Tippy Canoe and Tyler 2 promise. And the promise of the campaign, they didn't tell you that the Tippy Canoe part wouldn't be lasting very long. It would mostly just be Tyler.
Arthur turned him down. Conkling goes to Arthur 2 weeks into his presidency and says Robertson must be removed as collector of New York. Arthur essentially says, get the hell out of here. Arthur did want to keep Conkling's friendship, offered him a position as a Supreme Court justice, but Conkling turned him down. Grant also made his suggestions. Arthur shot him down as well. At the same time, Blaine stepped down as Secretary of State and then eventually got the nomination in 1884, beating Arthur. Arthur's problem in 1884 is that his old stalwart friends rallied to Blaine, while a lot of the Garfield Republicans rallied to Blaine as well. So the stalwarts and the half-breeds, Mark Summers says it in Romanism and Rebellion, that the divide between them was not nearly as severe as people say. If you look at 1884 election, essentially a bunch of half-breeds and stalwarts joined together to put Blaine in charge. Or to make Blaine the nominee. So that should be kept in mind. There was these constant rumors that Arthur, remember I told you that Conkling met with Arthur and Arthur said, I'm not going to do what you want me to do?
Yeah.
There were rumors for years afterwards that Conkling went in there and told Arthur what his cabinet was going to be, and that's who Arthur's cabinet was. So much like Russiagate, Arthur was chased around with a constant low-level conspiracy theory that, Roscoe Conkling's actually the one in charge, even though he's obviously not, if you look at the evidence, right?
Yeah.
That low-level conspiracy theory dogged Arthur through his entire term. Anyway, last fun fact to end with, when Blaine became the nominee in 1884, he tried to get Conkling to support him and make speeches. Conkling was essentially like, go to hell. He advised Grover Cleveland. He gave Grover Cleveland letters that Blaine had written that were scandalous letters about, corporate scandal stuff. And he tried to take whatever allies he still had left in New York. His power base wasn't what it used to be, but he still had some allies, and told them all vote for Cleveland. So there we go. Roscoe Conkling hated James G. Blaine so much, he went against his own party to get him defeated in 1884. And he asked nothing from Grover Cleveland. Apparently, Blaine being defeated was prize enough.
Damn.
Yeah, I gotta respect that. I mean, I don't like Roscoe Conkling for a lot of reasons, but I like to say, I believe revenge is the purest of motivations.
So I guess you must like John McCain then.
Last notes on Gateau. Gateau's trial began a few months after Arthur was president. Fun fact I read up on: do you know how many pages the transcript is for his trial? Can you guess? Guess how many pages you think? Huh?
How long did the trial last?
2-3 months.
I'm gonna go with 3,000 pages.
Wow. Okay, you overshot. 2,600. It's still a lot, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
they called like 150 witnesses or something. That's a fucking lot, man.
So did they call everybody who was in the train station at that time?
Just about, actually. Gateau's people had their defense was interesting. They said Garfield was not killed by Gateau. He was killed by the physicians, which is actually true. And second, Gateau's crazy. And keep in mind, a lot of people thought that. Logan, for one, was like, that guy needs... Logan, even before Gateau shot anybody, was like, that guy needs to be in a madhouse, you know? It didn't work out. Gateau was hanged. The trial was a complete circus. It's one of the zaniest trials in American history. Lots of outbursts. Lots of screaming and yelling. Gateau was almost murdered twice before they actually hanged him. When he was hanged, he read from the Bible, being a theologian, of course, and then recited one of the worst poems you'll ever read. I won't recite any of it right now. Go look it up yourself.
Are you sure?
Let's just say...
Let's do the poem.
You want to do the poem? All right, let me go find it real quick, all right?
All right.
So how do you feel about Charles Gateau? He's my favorite presidential assassin, by far.
Yeah, I would say so. He's definitely more interesting than that dude who shot Reagan.
Oh, Hinckley?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hinckley he was obsessed with Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver. Well, he failed though. I mean, you've got Booth, you've got the guy who killed McKinley, whose name I can never pronounce, and then you've debatably got Oswald, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Oswald has his own interesting stuff, you know, being that he was like a Marine who became a communist. There's a novel based in his life written by a guy before he even like became an assassin. He's a New Orleans guy, so one of the bars around here actually has a plaque that says Lee Harvey Oswald drank here.
Well.
That bar is Le Bon Temps Roulé. The other bar I like to hang out was Henry's Bar. Both of those are on Magazine Street. But anyway, but yeah, no, Gateau. I mean, he's out there. He has a weird life, and he really thought he was doing the Lord's work.
I mean, look, the part where he can't get laid at an orgy. I mean, all right, you know, I'll confess there have been times in my life where I've done inept things and self-cock-blocked, you know. That's part of being young and learning about how people work and how life works. But I can't imagine how much incompetence it would take to not get laid at an orgy. I can't comprehend it. I can't wrap my head around it.
I will say this: it's actually not technically an orgy.
Well, I mean, it's a free love society though, so it's a place where it shouldn't be that hard.
Yes, you were correct. But this is Charles Gateau. You know, he is a. It's kind of weird. Oswald's kind of a fuck up and a failure. I would never call Booth that though. You know, Booth was an acclaimed actor.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a failure insofar as he never served in the Confederate Army because his mother wouldn't let him, essentially. And while he did join the Confederacy's espionage network in Washington, he wasn't like a very effective agent, you know. So one could say that Booth really wanted to help the Confederacy, and he never did. So in that regard, you would think of himself as a failure. But you know, Booth was a very successful actor, charming, charismatic, and handsome. Gateau is none of these things. He is not a good actor. He is not charming. He is not charismatic.
He's got the John Brown eyes.
He does. I actually was thinking about. I was actually thinking that Charles Gateau is a very John Brown-esque figure. He believes that his act of violence will cleanse the nation.
Also, somebody made a good point in chat earlier. They said that Ohio Icicle would be a really good serial killer name.
Yes, yes, it would. Holy shit! Now, if I was a tour guide in Ohio, that's the kind of serial killer you want to talk about on a crime tour. The Ohio Icicle. Like that is
Yeah.
a great nickname for a serial killer. All right, here's the poem, everybody. It's awful. He said it should be set to music to be very effective. Was his words. I'm going to the Lordy. I am so glad. I'm going to the Lordy. I am so glad. I'm going to the Lordy.
Is that it?
Glory,
Oh.
hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. I'm going to the Lordy. I love the Lordy with all my soul. Glory, hallelujah. And that is the reason I'm going to the Lord. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. I'm going to the Lord. I saved my party and my land. Glory, hallelujah. But they have murdered me for it. And that is the reason I'm going to the Lordy. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. I'm going to the Lordy. I wonder what I'll see when I get to the Lordy. I expect to see most glorious things, beyond all earthly conception, when I am with the Lordy. Glory, hallelujah, glory, hallelujah, I am with the Lord. Anyway, then they hanged him.
So you're telling me that that beautiful poem did not make them think maybe they should commute the sentence to life in prison so you can continue to make great art? Because there are a lot of opportunities there that I feel like even just being sarcastic, I could improve that poem. When he said, "Oh Lordy," he could have said, "I won't live to see 40," because I think he was only, what, 38 or 39?
Something like that.
So there you go. There's an improvement, and that's not even being very creative. I mean, Jesus, that was fucking terrible. Um, I feel like that is what he should be ashamed of. Not killing Garfield, but that fucking poem is what he should really be ashamed of. Or, well, I don't know. That or not being able to get laid in a free love society. I don't know which is worse. If anything, that poem is probably worse, though.
He gets awards. Worst poem ever. Can't get laid to Free Love Society. And I killed a president.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, because this guy's not, like, he's not that bad looking or whatever. He's just, I mean, clearly he comes across as crazy, but fuck, I mean, maybe it was just when he talked. Maybe if he had just kept his mouth shut at the Free Love Society, he could have gotten laid once or twice.
There was a consistent thing where people just found him annoying.
Yeah.
Was pretty consistent in his life.
So maybe he should have tried the strong silent type approach. Because clearly talking, every time he talked, things just went sideways.
Do you have any thoughts on the Garfield assassination in general? Any questions about it?
I mean, what do you think might have happened, say, had Gateau failed, Garfield survived, and then finished his term? How different do you think the 1880s would have turned out with Garfield rather than Arthur?
It's a bit hard to tell. There's a few things of note. Rutherford B Hayes apparently at the time when Garfield was improving said, like, if he improves, he'll be more powerful than Washington or Lincoln because the country's in such sympathy with him, right? And it's such an agony. I mean, the country's the nation was literally opening up newspapers to find out what Garfield's health was that day, and they go into detail. All right. So there is an idea that that Garfield would have had even more power and leverage. And keep in mind, he had just won his political fight. He had broken the stalwarts in Conkling's gang. They, of course, still had some influence and could pull some stuff, but he's won. Civil service reform was pretty high on his priority list. That said, I don't know what else necessarily. His platform was in 1880. When I say tepid, he wasn't going to talk about anything that might split the party up, like, say, workers' rights or something. But in some ways, Arthur just kind of completed what Garfield was going to do anyway, the civil service reform. If anything, it maybe was deeper with his death. Now, that being said, the Pendleton Civil Service Act had flaws and loopholes in it that were exploited for 10, 20 years afterwards. So don't think to yourself that got passed and everything was fine. The spoil system, to one degree or another, was still going on all the way to Woodrow Wilson in some ways. Okay, but it is the first step away from that, from the spoil system set up by Andrew Jackson, if you will. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, Garfield, for one, like I've said many times this thing before, easily one of the 5 or 10 most intelligent men ever elected president. Uh, Politically, I would say fairly savvy. So he's one of the best politicians of the era as well. And I say that because people, it might be hard to think, right? But sometimes people who are bad at politics get elected president, correct?
Yeah.
Like Donald J. Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had two people running against each other who were both bad at politics. One of them had to win.
I think Biden's good at politics, but
Or he was. I mean, at this point, I'm not entirely sure.
well, I mean, if Jimmy Dore's right, he hasn't done a press conference in 52 days since he's been president. So but that being said, we've had presidents who aren't very good at politics.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Garfield, though, was a man who was good at it. While at the same time, keeping, for lack of a better way to put this, he's very politically capable, but he definitely has a moral center and beliefs that he adheres to. And I mention that because someone like Biden, I don't believe has that. I think Biden is like, he changed with the winds completely. Franklin Roosevelt, in many ways, is the same way, I would say. But Garfield did have an actual center to himself. So would he have been a good president? Probably so.
Huh.
I don't know if it's necessarily a tragedy that his life was cut short, at least a tragedy in the Greek sense, but it's sad. Very sad, Especially since the doctors fucked up so badly.
Also, especially since the assassination was basically caused by mental illness of someone else. Yeah, I mean, there was not really a cause. He just kind of was murdered by a crazy person. So I can see how this example would be used later to just justify the idea that all assassins are crazy people.
Yeah, if anybody fits that stereotype, it's Charles Gateau. I mean, this is a guy who he did work on Garfield's behalf to help get him elected president. His influence was practically nothing. And for that, he believed he needed to be the ambassador to 2 of the most powerful countries in the world.
There was
that's his payment.
There's a newspaper from July 13th, 1881 called Puck. And the cover is An Office or Your Life. And he's holding it out as a threat with a pistol in his hand.
That's Puck for you, man.
And it says, a model office seeker.
Yes.
I was a lawyer, a theologian, and a politician.
Dude, Puck had good stuff back then for the political cartoons. Puck was a good magazine for that. They actually have one of my favorite. Actually, I'll leave with this one before you close up Garfield. There's a great Puck illustration of Grant surrendering to Garfield, like Appomattox style.
Whoa!
When he loses the nomination, that's pretty potent, But Puck, if I'm not mistaken, tended to be pro-Democrat, anti-Republican, and civil service reform was not a Republican or Democrat issue. It depended on what faction you were within either party. The gentleman Pendleton, whose name is attached to the reform bill, was a Democrat. And not just any Democrat. He was McClellan's running mate. Dyed-in-the-wool copperhead. The kind who was like, the South's going to win the war. Just, let them go with that. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
And Pendleton, he lost his office, and then he came back and rebranded himself as a reformer. George Pendleton's one of the more interesting politicians of this era, I would say. I'd like to read more about him, but anyway. So that's the Garfield assassination, ladies and gentlemen. It's maybe I'm sound like the historical hipster. Become my favorite presidential assassination, the one I think's the most interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I had no idea about any of this.
Mm-hmm.
I really need to learn more about the Gilded Age in general.
They're all in. I mean, all the assassinations, of course, are interesting in their own way. But yeah, you know me. I like the Gilded Age. I do find it fascinating. I like the look of it. I like the fact you have these like major political fights happening, and they're dealing with the fact that the Civil War is over. I don't know. There's a lot there, you know. But anyway, I've had a little too much to drink to get into specifics on my historical affinity for the Gilded Age.
Okay. Well,
I mean, it's not a time I would go back to, though. You know.
No, fuck no.
No, fuck no.
Our last individual of the evening. We'll check for super chats in just a second, but our last individual, Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, huh?
Yep. Also known as Malcolm Little, his birth name. Let's see.
Before you begin, have you read his autobiography?
I have not.
I highly recommend it. I read it maybe in 2013 or 14. Very, very good. I definitely recommend that book in particular. It's much like the Confessions of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or I mean, one of my favorite genres anyway is memoir and autobiography, and I do consider Malcolm X to be one of the best for sure. Anyway, please continue.
Oh, so Sean, someone said Chick is totally a neckbeard steampunk fanboy and or model train enthusiast.
Thank you, man. That was funny.
Yeah, it was pretty good. All right.
Thanks, man. Thank you, Admirals.
I think it's a Dismal or something like that.
Dismal. Okay, Dismal. It looked like Admiral over here.
All right. So, the last gentleman we're covering is Malcolm X. Of course, he was not as high profile as Martin Luther King, who was another civil rights era leader who was assassinated. But Malcolm X is relevant right now because recently, within the last few weeks, there have been revelations about the conditions of his assassination on February 21st, 1965. First, I'll just lay a little bit of groundwork for Malcolm X so you know who he was and why there were people who wanted to see him dead. So Malcolm X was born on May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, and his birth name was Malcolm Little. In 1946, he was arrested for breaking and entering and larceny. Given a 10-year sentence, he only served 6 of those years. He was paroled in 1952. By the time he came out of prison, however, he had joined the Nation of Islam, which was a prison organization, or at least prison-centered organization for black men trying to convert them to Islam. The idea from its founder, Elijah Muhammad, was that they need to embrace their black identity, get in touch with their black roots, and embrace a religion that he called black. Christianity was a slave religion. It was forced on them by their Christian white masters. So you need to go back and find a legitimately black religion, and Elijah Muhammad felt that Islam qualified. So Malcolm X...
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, quick question. Nation of Islam, I don't know much about it. Is it Muslim or not really?
It's Muslim, but it's kind of Muslim in the way that Mormonism is Christian.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's been heavily Americanized and localized to the point that a regular Sunni or Shia Muslim would look at it and say, "What the fuck is this shit?"
Yeah, I kind of did think Nation of Islam was like Mormon Islam, you know?
Yeah,
anyway.
It's basically what it is, or at least it's the equivalent. And it's got a lot of other beliefs built into it which are not part of regular Islam. And we'll get to those soon. So, he started going by Malcolm X by the time he got out of prison, and the reason is because the X they stand in for his irretrievably lost African surname and his irretrievably lost heritage that he's trying to reclaim. And a lot of the people in the movement also had similar names, or went by similar names. Louis X, for instance, later became Louis Farrakhan. He's another member of the Nation of Islam at this time. So Malcolm becomes, within 5 or so years of his release, he becomes the public face of the Nation of Islam. Even though he is a guy from Nebraska and everything, he moves to New York, and he gets involved as a spokesman after a man is beaten by the police. So there's an incidence of police brutality against a black man. It becomes a public scandal, and Malcolm X is the guy out there talking about it, or one of the chief guys talking about it. So he becomes sort of a celebrity, and he is younger and more charismatic than Elijah Muhammad. So he becomes the public face of the entire organization by the early 60s. To the point that even though Elijah Muhammad founded the Nation of Islam and was responsible for all of his doctrine, people associated the movement with Malcolm X. And somebody wrote a book about the Nation of Islam in 1963, and they quote 6 speeches in it. 5 of them are by Malcolm X, and 1 of them is by Elijah Muhammad. This creates a lot of tension between the two men, by the way. A lot of it is that Elijah Muhammad becomes very jealous of Malcolm X's influence and power. So that conflict will brew over time. Malcolm also not only is the most public figure within the Nation of Islam, he also recruits probably the most famous pickup that they got, and that was Cassius Clay, better known as Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
Arguably the greatest boxer of all time, or at least one of.
Definitely one of, for sure.
Yeah, so he was the most high-profile convert that they had, and he was converted directly by Malcolm X. And they were good friends for a while. So, the problems between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. Let's first talk about what the Nation of Islam believes. So, the Nation of Islam is a black supremacist organization. They believe that black people are not equal, but rather are superior. They also believe that originally there was one race in the world, and that race was black. All of the other races are kind of sort of mongrel spin-offs, mutations, or whatever.
Sounds charming.
Yeah, and what's the other belief here? White people are devils. So I don't know this for sure, but I think the phrase white devil might have come from Nation of Islam. And also, they believe that the demise of the white race will come in the intermediate future. They think that white people are just not viable, so they're not going to survive in the long run. I mean, I guess if the sun intensifies more, maybe the Nation of Islam will be proven right. Who knows? Anyway. So, as you might imagine, given their ideology, they were not very popular and they were not very mainstream. Compared with the movement of Martin Luther King, which sought out white allies, talked about equality, and sort of rooted itself in the tradition of American history by talking about how slaves have been granted equal rights for a while, and the larger Christian tradition that was shared by most of the country. Nation of Islam was very antagonistic and very in your face, and not well designed to recruit people. And if anything, what recruitment that they did have was almost entirely due to the charisma of Malcolm X. But when I talk about him having charisma, this also means that he pissed a lot of people off because he made lots and lots of inflammatory comments. In some ways, he was the kind of guy who would have become famous for being a shit stirrer in the social media era. Because that's basically what he did back then, just by using newspapers and the radio. So when he joined the Nation of Islam, there were 500 or so members, maybe up to 1,200. And by the time he left the Nation of Islam in 1964, there were 25 to 75,000 members, which is not big, but at the same time, if you think about the rate of growth, it's pretty impressive. Especially considering that his sort of era of prominence was only 1957 to 1964 as Nation of Islam guy.
Yeah.
So
interestingly enough, one of his admirers was the George Lincoln Rockwell. You
Yeah.
know him?
Not really.
Yeah, that's that was the guy who that's the guy who founded the American Nazi Party.
Yeah, they did a rally together once. I remember reading about that earlier.
Yeah, no, like if you're reading like old far right, especially if they're race based in the '60s and even today, Malcolm X is one of the people they speak about more positively. Like some forum recently I was looking at because you got to keep on this shit. You got to know what people are saying, right? And they're all talking about how they're like, oh my god, Tubman's in the 20. They're like, yeah, it should be Malcolm X. They're like, yeah, it should be Malcolm X. We were a black guy and they think should be Malcolm X. I'm like, okay, good to know you guys are admirers of Malcolm X. There we
Well, I
go.
mean,
Huh?
I guess he's kind of an ethno-state guy, or at least he's compatible with their idea of an ethno-state.
That's actually one of their views. He's an ethno state guy, and they're also like they also like his emphasis on discipline and self reliance. I guess
Yeah. Are they the
So
kinds of people who ignore what he said in his last year or so, and they just focus on the
probably
when he
so.
was really into
Well,
black
what he
nationalism?
said. Well, like but what he said before he got shot was just not based. We're just saying that it's not based. That's what they're saying. Okay.
I find it interesting that white supremacists would look at a guy who says that black people are superior and say, "I like that guy. He makes sense to me."
I mean, birds of a feather flock together, right?
I guess so. Maybe it's that idea of like what is it? Dictators often admire each other because they, even if they are enemies opposed to one another, they still admire each other because they see an equal or somebody who's a like-minded person.
Yeah, like the one I always say about Hitler and Stalin both thought the only other person that was almost as great as them was the other guy.
Yeah,
You know, this is maybe a bit of a thing there. But anyway, I think worth pointing out. You know,
yeah. And it's a good thing for Malcolm X that he did have a great deal of charisma because some of the things he says didn't really make all that much sense. So, for instance, on December 1st, 1963, he got all kinds of flack. He basically got canceled for saying that the JFK killing was, quote, the chickens coming home to roost.
yes,
And
I
no
remember.
one cries
Yeah.
when the chickens come home to roost. And of course, everybody got pissed off. There was a big media hoopla. And the Nation of Islam officially denounced his stance because their official press conference before that, they had said they expressed sympathy with the Kennedy family. But then after he said that, he was banned from speaking on their behalf for 90 days. And by this point, he and Elijah Muhammad had been butting heads. Malcolm had actually been kind of investigating Elijah Muhammad personally because one of the beliefs of Nation of Islam is that you should have monogamy and you should not have any kind of sex outside of marriage. Apparently, Elijah Muhammad, however, had a lot of mistresses, and another person who was against that practice was Elijah's son, and apparently that relationship was really rocky for many years because his son was trying to make his father live up to the ideals, and the father basically said, "No, I like women."
Hmm.
So there was that conflict. Malcolm was siding with the son. There was the jealousy that Elijah felt towards Malcolm because Malcolm clearly had more of a following, had a lot more presence. Elijah, from what I can tell, was not all that charismatic. So it'd kind of be the equivalent of if L. Ron Hubbard had lived longer, Tom Cruise is still converted to Scientology, and everybody associated the religion with Tom Cruise rather than L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was a man of immense ego. He would not have stood for that. And in some ways, that's kind of what's happening with Elijah Muhammad. Although I don't know if he was necessarily upset that people liked Malcolm X because that was the idea. He was the front man, but it was just the degree to which they looked to and deferred to Malcolm X rather than himself. That's what pissed him off. He wanted it to be a little more balanced. He wanted to get credit, and it wasn't going to happen. So ultimately, Malcolm X departs from, or another point of contention between them was over an LA incident where police broke into a mosque affiliated with the Nation of Islam and they shot at least one Muslim. And Malcolm X thought that because it was a desecration of a holy place that they needed to retaliate with violence against the LAPD. Elijah Muhammad, who didn't want his organization to be completely wiped out, said no.
I'm sorry. That's great. Like, I don't want my organization completely wiped out.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a case where Elijah Muhammad was looking at this rationally. Because if he tried to retaliate against the LAPD, he'd immediately be labeled an open terrorist, and J. Edgar Hoover's FBI would drop the hammer and it would be over within days.
Yeah.
But by this point, they already had agents all over the damn place, and they knew everything that was going on in the Nation of Islam. Anyway, Malcolm X was infuriated.
That's good delivery, man. That's good delivery on that one.
Yeah, so Malcolm X basically saying Elijah Muhammad is not real. This guy was a wimp when our religion was assaulted, and he doesn't live up to the ideals. So I'm going my own way. So he founded something called Muslim Mosque Inc. or something like that. Just some really dumb name that's not very interesting.
Huh.
And around
I guess he's not a good salesman when it comes to that, huh?
Yeah, he tried to get Muhammad Ali to go with him. Because that would have been a high-profile defection, and it would have shown that people were losing interest in Elijah Muhammad. But Muhammad Ali said no, and later in life he said that was one of his greatest regrets because Malcolm had been one of the best friends he'd ever had.
Why did Muhammad Ali say no? Did he say why exactly?
I guess he wasn't convinced, or I don't know exactly why he said no, but he turned him down. Maybe a lot of people were afraid of Elijah Muhammad. I should have added that part. There were people within the organization, including people who were probably undercover agents, who were saying that anyone who got on Elijah Muhammad's bad side tended to turn up dead. So,
well, that's encouraging for Malcolm X's future.
Yeah, and I'm pretty convinced that Elijah Muhammad was probably behind everything. So, fast forward, now we're in 1964, Malcolm X has departed, he founds his new organization, and now he'll spend most of the rest of his life abroad, because he goes on a pilgrimage to Mecca. So he's trying to establish credibility as a Muslim. So far, he's basically just saying, I'm like Elijah Muhammad, but I'm not a pussy. Because he thinks Elijah's a pussy for not retaliating in LA, right? That's basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
But then when he goes to Mecca, he realizes that Islam is not about being black. It's not about race. It's a universalist religion, just like Judaism and Christianity. More so Christianity than Judaism.
No, I wouldn't call Judaism a universal religion.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I know they have a very small outreach, but for the most part, it's definitely not universalist. But Christianity and Islam are. The idea being that it is open to anyone because God is universal for all mankind.
And yes, and if we all believe in the in these sacred texts and God and Jesus and Allah and Muhammad, then we are all brothers and sisters.
Exactly. So he learns about this, and that changes his worldview completely. And so over the next year, his views are going to be changing rapidly. And he becomes a Sunni Muslim, so he becomes part of the mainstream of Islam, the dominant branch. And I'm not sure exactly what part of Sunniism he joined, but I think it was probably not dissimilar to the kind of Sunniism that you see in a place like Turkey. I don't think that he was particularly radical. I don't think he was a Wahhabist or anything like that. So his politics moderated considerably because of his religious views. And he gets in line with Martin Luther King style civil rights activism. Because before that, he would mock openly people like King and his followers. He called the March on Washington the farce on Washington. He said there's no way white people will ever let you participate in politics and succeed. That if you think you're going to get anywhere through participation, you're an idiot. And that you have to rely upon violence and force because that's all the white devil will understand.
Also, I would say, am I inaccurate to think that he has a kind of a somewhat of a Booker T. Washington view in regard to the best way for black people to improve themselves is to improve their lot on their own, not through politics.
I'm not sure.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like, in other words, like the Booker T. Washington idea is, politics, schmaltics, black-owned businesses, right? Um, like that kind of stuff. Just sorry, I'm not being as eloquent as I would like right now. But you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, like the
Um,
idea of internal improvements and no, I get what you're saying. I that might be
yeah,
part of what he was into all along though, because I mean part of black nationalism would be full independence and building up your own traditions, your own specialist and all that.
which is
But
not.
yeah.
That's not quite the Booker T. Washington idea, but they have a lot in common, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So with Malcolm, um, he begins to move in that direction. Apparently, he meets with King. They reconcile, and they might have even coordinated stuff together in the future because now they share the same goals, and Malcolm is into peaceful protest and participating in the system to some extent. So, for the people who are part of the Nation of Islam, especially Elijah Muhammad himself, this is just straight up fucking treason. Malcolm X went
Yeah,
from being their most strident member to being on the other side. And on several occasions, Elijah Muhammad commented to people that Malcolm was a traitor and deserved to die. And there were plenty of other members of the Nation of Islam who felt the same way. Malcolm will continue to get death threats for the next year.
this is some
Continuously.
Henry the Second. This is some Henry the Second, Thomas a Becket shit, right? Like,
Kinda.
like who will rid me of this troublesome bishop?
I mean, that's kind of going on to an extent. Um, and Malcolm also starts to get more international due to his travels. He actually speaks twice in Britain. Some guy got elected as a conservative there in 1965, and he ran a very explicitly racist campaign saying that if you want an N word as a neighbor, vote Liberal or Labour. So Malcolm went to Britain to speak against that, and then he returned about a week or two before his death. So he was becoming an international figure, kind of like King. And the thing he had going for him that made him able to jettison the past was that, again, Malcolm X had crazy charisma.
Yeah.
So people liked to hear him speak. They were willing to hear him out. They were willing to accept his change of heart and all that. He did get banned from France, though. He visited once and spoke, and they would not allow him back in. I think because they don't like Muslims, but I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
I believe De Gaulle was in charge that time.
yeah, that would make sense. De Gaulle was definitely not a big fan of his Muslim subjects, especially the ones who wanted to resettle in France. Um, so anyway, Malcolm comes home to New York, and on February 15th or thereabouts, there was a firebombing attempt at his home,
Mm.
and it almost killed his daughter. He had three daughters who were 6, 4, and 2, respectively, and one of them was next to a window where a firebomb went off and didn't quite succeed in catching the house on fire. He held a press conference where he said he had no doubt that Elijah Muhammad ordered it, and that the idea was to firebomb his house from the front and the back to trap him and his family in there and kill them all. So he was naming accusers, and he also said, further, I know the FBI has all kinds of moles in the Nation of Islam, so they were totally aware of this, and because they refused to act to prevent it, they're on the hook for this. They are culpable.
Mm.
Then, a few days later, on February 18th, this is something that the revelations have helped to clarify, and I'll talk about what the
Okay,
revelations are if we talk about the assassination. On
gotcha.
February 18th, a few of his security detail, the people running it, were arrested because supposedly they were planning to blow up the Statue of Liberty. So now his
Okay,
chief security guys are in jail. February 21st, he is doing a speech at a place called the Audubon or something like that. And as a small scuffle breaks out, he gets involved, and then 3 gunmen or more light him up with weapons he is shot 21 times and he dies at the theater. 3 men are arrested, one of whom was almost certainly guilty, and the other 2 of whom, to this day, because I'm pretty sure both of them are still alive, both of them, even though they served a jail sentence for this, both have denied to the bitter end that they had anything to do with it. And one of them was effectively exonerated recently because of recent revelations. And the recent revelation came from a guy who was a rookie cop in 1965. His name was Ray Wood. And what Ray Wood said on his deathbed to a cousin was that he was an NYPD undercover cop. He had infiltrated the organization. He was a black guy, so he blended in. And he was the guy who entrapped the security dudes with the Statue of Liberty plot. And he was also in the room at the theater where Malcolm X was shot. And he said that one of the guys who was arrested for the shooting, I think his name was Thomas Johnson, didn't do anything. Totally innocent. So, This is one case where a guy maintained his innocence, and he was definitely innocent.
Man, that's gotta fucking suck, man. You're innocent, and you're still like, but nobody believes you?
Yeah.
Shit.
And you still spend 20 or 30 years in jail. Also, one of the guys who was arrested and convicted ended up becoming a leader, I think, within the Nation of Islam under Louis Farrakhan. So I think he had his own chapter somewhere for a while. But this is after he got out of the prison, and this wasn't until the 1990s, so... But yeah, Malcolm X. Basically, the FBI... It looks like the FBI was not directly involved with killing him. However, they did create the conditions where some of the Nation of Islam people would get to him. And they took care of his loyalists because he didn't have that many left. As I mentioned, his views were changing rapidly, and there were a lot of people who were either furious with him or just simply confused, because his views were evolving rapidly and they couldn't keep up.
All right.
And there is currently a Netflix documentary which deals with that. I have not yet watched it, unfortunately. I think it's just called Who Killed Malcolm X. I recommend that to anybody who's curious about learning more. I know I'll be watching it soon. And there's a book, I think it's called something like The Confessions of Ray Wood. It's written by his relative who he confessed to on his deathbed, because this was something that was troubling him. He felt like he had done something unjust and that he had betrayed, his fellow black people and all that. So he made very detailed confessions, and then his relative worked with civil rights historians to contextualize all of this and put together a book. So this is something we're learning more about, even though it's been 56 years since the assassination.
Always more to learn. You mentioned that about that made me think, though, when you were talking about the person being regretful. Then I was thinking about Robert Ford with Jesse James.
Yeah.
Where the person who carries out the assassination, murder, however you want to put it, doing it for whatever reasons they have at the time, then realize they become now a notorious figure, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, hell, Robert Ford, he was gunned down in his saloon, I believe, by somebody being like, this is for Jesse James,
And to conclude about Malcolm X, I'm not saying Elijah Muhammad did it, but I think it's pretty obvious.
I think we all know Elijah Muhammad did it.
Yeah. I mean, it's even more obvious in the OJ case.
Well, I got to say this, though. Oswald said he was a patsy, right? And I don't know what Booth would have said, except the fact that he did, while he's bleeding to death, looked at his hands and looked at him and said, useless, right?
Yeah.
But it should be kept in mind that Charles Gateau, after shooting Garfield, yelled, I am a stalwart and Arthur will be president.
Yeah. Well,
Like
that's how I vote for people.
no denial, man. I am a stalwart, and Arthur will be president.
Jesus. Yeah, that's got to be. I don't know. I mean, also another weird tidbit about Malcolm X's assassination, and I don't know if this is
Yeah.
the first time anybody made this argument, but you know the argument when there's a mass shooting and people blame people who use any kind of violent rhetoric or demonize a group that ends up getting victimized.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might have been one of the first instances where somebody made that case against the Nation of Islam, specifically saying that they created an atmosphere where there was this hatred of Malcolm X that led to the actions of the three men who got arrested.
I mean, or the other end, right? Like, Conkling, Grant, and Arthur had created an atmosphere of negativity for Garfield, which led to Gateau to be like, the only way to save America is to shoot the man, right?
Yeah.
You know, and naturally, there was no plot to kill Garfield in that sense, right? And then they were upset about that too. I think Conkling had a quote about the Garfield assassination where he said, "How can I speak into a grave?
Huh.
What can I do?"
Yeah.
Right?
Also, I didn't realize Wallace D. Fard was the guy who created the Nation of Islam, according to somebody in chat. Elijah Muhammad
Okay.
was the guy who sort of theorized it, and then Malcolm was the face.
Kind of like if you're looking at Joseph Smith versus Brigham Young.
Yeah, sort of. And then I don't know who would be but I guess Joseph Smith was also the preeminently. But the Brigham Young would have been both the Elijah Muhammad and the Malcolm X, though, because he was the governor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, sir, this has been a most excellent stream. I've had a lot of fun with this one.
Yeah. Oh, we had one last super chat.
What you got, man?
We had one from Ken Cook, $4.99. Thank you, Ken. Good show. Also, do you think how do you think Biden will handle China? Cheers. And then emoji of two glasses clinking.
Whew. Sorry, that's a tough one. I know that there is a narrative about Beijing Biden, if you will. I don't really I don't know how much stock I would put in that. What do you think?
I get the impression that Biden will probably just embrace the pro free trade policy of Obama, Bush, and almost every other modern president. I don't think that he will take any real action against China. I don't think that makes him an agent of Beijing. I think that just makes him a neoliberal. And to be fair, a lot of the people who say that Trump represented the sea change in that regard ignore that Trump didn't do that much policy-wise. Most of Trump's supposed actions or shift was almost entirely rhetorical.
Yeah, I think with Trump and China, you run the risk of either downplaying or overplaying it, right?
Yeah.
Because it definitely wasn't business as usual. But you're right. There were a lot of ways in which it was not some massive sea change in relation to the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't. If you looked at Trump's rhetoric versus his policy and also his cabinet appointments, you see that the level of continuity is much, much higher than either his detractors or his supporters would want you to believe.
Yes, definitely. I don't know. I believe from what I have seen and from what he said, it would seem to me that Biden would like to have a positive relation with China, which in some ways kind of reminds me of the Great Reset that Obama wanted with Russia, right?
With Hillary Clinton's reset button?
Yes, Hillary Clinton's fucking reset button. But I gotta ask, man, was it a Sega Genesis reset button?
No.
Just
Those
ask.
are white. I think the one Hillary had was a big red button.
Yeah, no, it should have been white, man. And she should have then yelled, Sega.
Yeah. Actually, if we ever had to do that with Japan, they would appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, totally, man.
That would restore the relationship immediately.
Tell man, we got the yesterday we got the Sega Genesis going. We were playing Jurassic Park here, you know. But anyway,
Sega.
yeah, that's right. The fucking T-Rex goes Sega.
Yeah, that's probably the best intro screen of any Genesis game.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's fucking good, man. I do like the Sonic 2 one though, where you see him like running by and then just goes Sega. It's great, man. But anyway, no, it just I don't know. I think Biden wants to have a more positive relationship with China than what Trump had, which I understand, and I get it. But you know that's sorry. The reason I say I get it is because there is one person said it best to me. They were like, okay, if you look at things foreign policy wise, Democrats want an anti-Russia foreign policy, and Republicans want an anti-China one. Now, neither country has a good record overall on a variety of things, and I wouldn't trust either one of them. But I also would not like to have overtly antagonistic relationships with either one of them, for the simple fact that I don't like that between nations, and that stuff leads to wars. But also, these are both powerful countries. They got a lot of nukes. They have large militaries. I don't really. I'm not into saber rattling. I don't like it. You know. So
I agree.
I mean, I get it. Hey, look, I get it, man. People will talk bad about Russia and China, and I get it. They're fucked up, you know. But not into saber rattling. I mean, hell, I think the entire Cold War was a disaster. If you ask me.
Yeah, it was a pretty big waste of resources, all things considered, and the real victims were the third world countries that were caught in between and had coups brought upon them.
Yeah, yeah. No, most certainly. In fact, that was the guy Neil Ferguson, who's as a historian, he's kind of like hit and miss, right? But the one book I read of his, he talked about that. He said that we think of people in the West think that after World War II, no more wars, but if you really think about it, it was like a third world war, if you will. It's very violent in the third world.
Yeah.
And so much of that is Cold War dependent, and it's fucking terrible. But,
Yeah. Oh, somebody
Anyway.
wanted to know if we'll ever do a tier list of civil rights leaders.
God, I don't know enough. I mean, what? They're talking like the 60s ones?
Yeah,
You know?
I guess, the main civil rights movement.
I mean, we all know King because he's a martyr. There's also Abernathy. He was a big guy.
Malcolm.
Yeah, Malcolm.
Although,
There's
I guess he really only became one for 10 minutes before he died.
Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah, Stokely Carmichael. I guess John Lewis would make it. At least,
John Lewis, yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't said my favorite, Huey Newton.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What about the guy from Boondocks?
Yeah, it's Huey.
No, I mean the grandpa who claimed to be a civil rights legend, remember?
Oh, fuck yeah, man. Who is They just call him Grandpa on the show.
Yeah, I know. I guess we didn't know. But they're doing that interview thing, and I like how his whole thing was, I was just trying to get the hell off the bus. I didn't want to be there.
Well, remember, yeah, he was supposed to be the main one on the bus, but it just happened to be Rosa Parks,
Yeah. Yeah, Rosa. I mean, she would definitely be on there.
Rosa fucking Parks, man.
I knew a guy, I had a friend when I was a kid. His dad was an active duty Air Force officer, and he also spent one of his sort of part-time occupations as he was a bodyguard for Rosa Parks.
Huh.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Neat. I never really got to know him because I was a kid and he was an adult Air Force officer. I just knew his son, so not really much of a story there, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I was kind of wondering about that because you'd be like, yeah, I was a bodyguard for. She was an asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he'd be like, oh God, man, I couldn't wait to be off that detail.
Yeah. Somebody wants to know if we'll do a tier list on ancient military commanders or generals, as in comparing Caesar, Hannibal, Scipio, Pompey, etc.
Well, best is so subjective. I mean, who's the best of the ancients, right? Hannibal,
Yeah.
Alexander, Cyrus.
Um, hard to say. I don't know. Also, judging degree of difficulty is also more difficult than it sounds at first glance.
Yes, yes, I get what you're saying. Um, it's telling that the I don't think the Persians ever won a pitched battle against Greeks or Macedonians, right?
No, they don't.
And yeah, don't be wrong though. There are individual battles where they inflict heavy losses.
Well, I guess they did defeat the Ionian Greeks, and I imagine there were some pitched battles involved in that, but I don't know the details.
They also against the Ionian Greeks though they have a lot of numerical advantages, and I also say that because I mean Persia very well could have beaten Alexander, but they weren't going to beat him in the battlefield. Like it's the second coming of Austerlitz or something, right?
Yeah.
They're going to beat him with naval raids and destroying his communications, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, imagine we'll do more ancient lists, but it'll probably be more time period focused. Because I think at one point we're talking about possibly doing, say, the major Roman politicians of the late Republic or from a specific decade or something like that.
Yeah. Did you tier rank the successors?
I did.
Okay, I thought you did.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. I'd probably be calling it quits here in a sec. This was good, man. I like talking about Buckingham and Garfield. And great to hear about Malcolm X and Caesar. I'm sorry I wasn't here for Philip II, though.
That's alright. Yeah, I guess potentially we could probably pull off another one of these, or I think we also had an idea at one point of failed assassination attempts.
Oh, yeah, those are fun.
Or then we do the opposite of what would the consequence have been if this had actually worked.
That's not bad.
Yeah, but also like it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it though, because you look at the assassination of Garfield, that was completely inept, and it still worked because the doctors were stupid.
It played a massive part in it. I mean, now look, fairness to Gateau. He shot twice and he hit Garfield both times.
Yeah.
Okay. His gun's on display somewhere. By the way, he already knew that too. Like he was already thinking about when I kill Garfield, my gun will be on display at a museum. He was already thinking that way.
Oh, you know something? An interesting parallel with that, like him being aware of his place in history. I forgot to mention it when I was talking about Philip II. But apparently, Pausanias was going around looking for advice, and he turned to some Greek sophist. And the guy said, you know what? If I were you and I was seeking immortal fame, one thing you could do is to kill an extremely famous person. Because so long as the memory of that person lives, your name will live right alongside of it.
Hmm. Huh.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
True, though.
Yeah, it is true, though. I mean, that's...
No, I mean, like, to Kennedy, Garfield, Lincoln, we all think of the assassin in conjunction with them.
Yeah, that's true. We always remember the assassins, even though they have no real significance in their own right.
They usually don't.
I mean, I'm glad that the memory of Gateau was preserved, because otherwise a man who can't get laid at the Free Love Society would have been lost to history. You know, the greatest tragedy imaginable, but, man. Fuck.
God damn it, man. God damn it, man. Fuck. There was an assassination I was just now thinking of. that I was like, that'd be a really good one to do, you know. But it's left me now.
I think the one that I wish I knew more about, and I'm not sure if there's any information available because this got busted super early, but when Obama was running for president, there were some meth heads who wanted to assassinate him. And their
Yeah,
plan
yeah.
involved a high speed car and a sniper rifle from this moving car.
Hmm. Oh, that's it. Hedreich, the number two guy in the SS. I would do him for another. If we're doing another successful assassination video list, I would do him. I would do Hedreich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to think who would I do. Maybe Caligula. Caligula was famously assassinated.
Oh yeah, great choice, man.
Um,
Very that's a good one.
Trying to think who else. Commodus was assassinated.
What about okay, what do you think of the idea of somebody they didn't really quite assassinate the person? Because assassination, we think there's a political component, but there's also like a planning component to it, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking of the Union General William Nelson, who Jefferson C. Davis, yeah, there was a Union General named Jefferson Davis, just like Nelson was like essentially was telling him to go to hell and slapped him repeatedly, so Davis just shot him. Does that count?
Kind of. I mean, I guess the term assassination tends to get bandied about loosely depending on the narrative somebody's trying to spin. And I can imagine somebody trying to make Jefferson C. Davis into a martyr if they were a defender of his. Although, I think you said that that guy was hated, so nobody gave a shit, right?
He was and he wasn't. Sherman and Rosecrans both wrote very highly of him as a combat commander, and he was very good as a combat commander. His soldiers mostly seem to have liked him. He's very brave and capable. It's just that, when you shoot your superior officer, a lot of guys going to hold it against you,
Right.
especially when you suffer no legal consequences. I mean, think about it. He murdered the man. He shot him, right?
Yeah.
Nothing happened. He's fine. Nothing ever happens.
And there's also the assassination of Nicephorus II.
Oh, what's the deal with that one?
It was on Christmas Day, and the plot was led by his nephew. One of the most famous palace coups ever, and it was also probably the most famous Byzantine assassination.
Oh, here's one for you. Tsar Paul the First. That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also part of the Paul did nothing wrong club, okay?
Yeah. I mean, I could see that.
I got theories on Paul, man. I don't think Paul was that bad. I just think he pissed off nobles, so they murdered him, essentially. He had some rough spots, but I kind of like Paul. I'd do Hedreich and Paul and maybe William Nelson.
Yeah, maybe the assassination of John Lennon. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mentioned Jesse James earlier. There's that movie, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. It's a really good movie, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah. It's based on a book. I never read the book. I heard it's a good book. But yeah, it's a really good movie. I'd recommend that one.
Okay.
Well, sir, you want to call it a night?
Sure. I think that's about all we're going to get out of this. But thank you for everybody who showed up. Let's see. Our winner of the evening for the book prize is Diogenes. Diogenes wins again. Total of 2275. So Diogenes, be sure to drop us a line on Discord and we'll send you another book.
Yeah.
Or actually, I guess you don't really need to because we already have your information. So I'll probably send you something
I got it, man.
this week.
Yeah, the books I'm sending to you, they're mailing out this week. So see them about 1 to 2, all right?
And then the other prize winner from a couple weeks ago, C.S. Ventura, your date of arrival, according to the post office, should be tomorrow for your book. So, all right. Well, that's it for tonight. Good night, everybody. Hope you all had a good weekend and that this coming week treats you well. All right. We're all